I positively hereby reconvene the Board of Education special meeting and open session at 5 p.m. Try it over again. I positively hereby reconvene the Board of Education special meeting and open session at 5 p.m. Please note this meeting is being recorded and live streamed to the public. We have a quorum present with all board members in attendance. I'd like to welcome the community members in attendance this evening. As a reminder, governing board meetings are a business meeting of the board, held in public, and although public participation is encouraged, and we're glad you're here, it is not the public's meeting. It is the duty of the board president and/or clerk of the board to maintain an orderly, respectful, and peaceful meeting where all perspectives, voices, and opinions are welcome. Please refrain from speaking out or over another person when they have the floor. At the appropriate time on the agenda, individuals wishing to provide public comment will be called upon one at a time to do so in accordance with Board Bylaw 9323. The board cannot and will not respond to non-agendized items, but a staff member will reach out to you on matters that may need to be reviewed as appropriate. Item D1, the board met in closed session to discuss student discipline. No action was taken. Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Purdue, would you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item D3, approval of the agenda. Calls for a motion and a second.
So moved.
Second.
Any comments? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passed 5-0. Do we have a student here for something?
She is not here with us.
Not here.
She's probably at a tennis match or something.
Doing something fun. Study session. E1, board finance presentation and board discussion. Dr. Andrews.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker. Actually, I'll have James Whittington, our Chief Financial Officer, do the actual presentation. But based on our last board meeting, we had our special meeting and study session regarding our bond feasibility. Quite a few questions came up about finances. We're fortunate to get our financial advisor so quickly this week. Mr. Whittington.
Yeah, so all that.
Sorry.
Yes, this evening we have Tim Carty from Piper Sandler. He serves as the district financial advisor. He's been doing some work with the district for the past several years. And based on the conversations in the last study session with the board regarding the bond feasibility study, we thought it'd be prudent to bring Tim, his financial expertise regarding how the general obligation bonds work, how the tax rates work, and some more information. So I will not try to steal any of Tim's slides, but I will turn it over to Tim to walk through his presentation this evening. So, Tim.
Sure. Thank you, James.
Welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. It's nice to see many of you again since it will be the first time. So I am Tim Carty. I work for the firm of Piper Sandler and Company. We've been fortunate for many, many years to be able to serve you as your financial advisor. I'm also joined by my colleague here, Jim Kim. What I think would be of help, perhaps, to the board members here this afternoon is as you think about the future of Marietta Valley Unified School District, the next frontier, as it comes to your facilities, your buildings and grounds and so forth. And if, whether it's 2024 or 2026 or whatever it might be, if the possibility of entertaining a future general obligation bond measure is something you might think about, we thought it would be helpful to just do a review of the basics of what a general obligation bond is, how the tax works, what a bond fund, and some of those sorts of topics. It might be a refresher for some of you on the board, it might be new for some of you on the board. And then also talk a little bit about, what has Myriad Valley Unified done in the past? What could you potentially do in the future? So it's really to try to give you some tools, some information tools to help you make future decisions and judgments as a board as you move forward with, again, the next frontier, if you will, for the district. So we've got a series of slides, and I'll go through them, and really it's a pleasure of the board. If you have questions along the way, or if you want to hold your questions for the end, whatever I can do to best be of help to you. But it's really just to try to give you some tools, some information, allow you to ask whatever questions you may have that can equip you to properly make decisions going forward. So what we thought we would do, just in terms of an initial subject, is to go over just a little bit about the basics of general obligation bonds. One of the things I always like to say, I'm from the East Coast. And where I'm from on the East Coast, school districts don't have to worry about this. When school districts need to improve their facilities, the money flows from the state. Not the case, unfortunately, in California. A number of years ago, the state of California really left it to local communities to address their facilities. There are matching funds available from time to time, but in order to access those matching funds, you have to generate money on your own. So again, where I'm from, that's a little bit different, but in California, that's the way the system is set up. So let's just look at some of the complete basics. So first of all, the general obligation bond is a funding mechanism for capital facilities. Widely used in almost every school district in California at some time in the last 10 or 20 years has availed itself of the general obligation bond. Now, it requires voter approval. In the old days, 2/3 was required for passage, but since the year 2000, 55% is now the rate of passage. One of the things about general obligation bonds, they can only be placed before the public when voters are otherwise voting. So in a 4-year period, I should say in a 2-year period, it's essentially, in a 4-year period, it's essentially 4 times. So it's the presidential primary, which would be March of 2024, the presidential general election, November of 2024. Then you skip 2025, and you would go to the gubernatorial primary, which most likely is June of 2026, and the gubernatorial general election, which is November of 2026. So every 4 years, there's 4 opportunities. So there's no opportunity to have a special election or do anything really in it. So 2024, March, November are the opportunities available. So everybody already has to be voting in order for going to the polls, in order for the school district to put a bond measure down. Now, a bond, if approved, it's not paid back by the school district. It's not paid back by your operating budget. It's paid back by the community through the form of a property tax. Now, there are certain limitations as to what school districts can ask the public to pay. For a unified K-12 school district, the most we can ask the community to pay is $60 per $100,000 of value of the property per year, and that's per election. Each time you get a new up to $60. Now, if we were an elementary school district, that would be $30. Or if we were a high school district, it would be $30. If we were a community college district, it would be $25. And one thing, and I'm going to mention this a couple of times, when they talk about $60 per 100,000, that's not the market value of your home, not what you could sell your home for. It's the value you see in your tax bill, what they call an assessed value. Now, to put a bond measure on the ballot for a 5-member board, you need 4 affirmative votes. So 3-1 does not put it on the ballot, 3-2 does not put it on the ballot. So you need 4 yes votes. And it's not board members necessarily voting that they're supportive of the bond or not supportive of the bond. They're voting to let the public decide. But you need 4 yeses. Now, if the community supports a bond measure, through the life of the bond, there are many situations where board approval is required for things to happen. And I'll talk a little bit more about this, but almost every school district, when they pass a bond measure, whatever dollar amount the public approved, they don't get all the money at once. Most of the time, bond funds come in over 6 years, 8 years, 10 years, whatever the time period is. So we'll talk more about that. So each time there's a draw on bond funds, that requires board approval. Each time projects are going to be undertaken, that requires board approval. So it's not once the public approves the bond measure, that's it. The school board at many junctures along the way takes actions to make this happen. Board approves each individual bond draw. Board approves the projects that each bond draw is going to fund. We'll talk about that. In return for the 55% approval, some accountability features were weaved into school district general obligation bonds. In the old days, with 2/3, you didn't have to have these. But now with 55%, you have to have an independent citizens oversight that is required annually to publish a fiscal and accountability audit and report. So that's an important thing to remember. That's required. There's lends some accountability to bond measures. Then there's this annual audit and transparency that goes along with that. So that's just at the highest level. A little bit about the basics of a general obligation bond. Now, what can a general obligation bond fund and what can't it fund? So if you look on the left, and basically it's capital facilities. Construct new schools, modernize or repair existing schools. You can furnish and equip. So technology equipment, furniture, desks, those kinds of things can be funded with bond funds. Obviously, safety and security for the last number of years has been a very important type of project in many school bond measures. And we know from Measure PB, you can fund technology, whether that's devices, whether that's technology infrastructure, because again, that fits into the furnishing and equipping. So basically, capital projects plus furnishing and equipping the schools allowed to be funded. What cannot be funded are operating expenses. So that's regular employee salaries and benefits, that's pension costs, anything that's an operating expense as opposed to a capital expense cannot be funded with bond measure. Not so much in Southern California, but up in Northern California. There are a lot of school districts that have what's called a parcel tax. That's not a bond. That can fund operations. That requires a 2/3 vote. I don't think there's any school districts in Riverside County that have one of those. There's none in Orange County that have one of those. There's none in San Diego County. But in Northern California, a little more common, they can fund operations. So bonds are capital projects. So when a school district thinks about a bond measure, there are generally 4 outside private sector professionals that assist the school district in the endeavor. So if you look at the upper left, financial advisor, that's what we do in Piper Sandler. We help put together the financial plan. How big is the bond? When is the money going to be delivered? What's the tax expected to be? That sort of thing. That's our job. If you look at the lower right, like anything in life, you always need an attorney. So for a school district to put a bond measure on the ballot, its legal counsel, or sometimes called bond counsel, drafts the election agendas that are in the ballot payment that they go before the voters. If you look at the upper right, most school districts, before they proceed And most school boards, before they proceed to put a general obligation bond measure on the ballot, want to do some community research, want to know that it's feasible, that the community wants this. So there's usually some public opinion polling that's done. That's the upper one. And then the lower left, I think you might have had a presentation for Bonnie Moss and Clifford Moss, who is your strategist. There's a firm that assists in terms of communicating with the public, interpreting the results of the poll, helping you as a board engage with the public. And if a school district, if a school board, I should say, votes to put a bond measure on the ballot, that strategist then often acts as the campaign manager or the local citizens campaign committee. So those are sort of the four private sector folks that you would see sit around the table: financial advisor, legal counsel, pollster, strategist. But I always put in the middle facilities plan, because that's what a bond is for. And I know one of the things your staff does, right, James, is annually there, you put together a facilities update. So I always connect everything to the facilities plan. Did you have a question?
I do, Mr. Curry. Excuse me, guys, I've had a terrible head cold, lose my voice, trying not to talk too much. Was Clifford Moss, it would be correct to say that they are fulfilling the role of pollster and strategist for us?
No. They would, so if you look at BBs in 2016, they filled the role of strategist.
Okay.
A firm called True North Research was the pollster. Now, often they collaborate closely, but yeah, Clifford Moss would not conduct the poll. It's the polling is a very specified line of work. There's only a couple of pollsters that really do almost all the work for school districts. True North is probably the leading firm.
And that's what Mrs. Moss mentioned to in her presentation. Okay.
Thank you for that clarification.
Sure. So anytime a school district proceeds, thinks about it, whether it puts it on the ballot or it's not to put it on the ballot, at some point, all four of those different types of firms assist the district. Now, a little bit more about what we do. So I mentioned in the upper left, this financial advisor. We create, that's Jim and myself, we create the bond financing plan that you're going to put before the voters. Because voters are going to want to know how much money you're asking for, what's the price tag. Well, how do we come up with that? So there's really what we would call 5 ingredients or components to the financial piece of a general obligation bond. One is the amount. How much, what's the big dollar amount you're going to ask the community to approve? $5 million, $100 million, what is that large amount? And as I mentioned, almost no school district, and this was the case for us in Measure BBs, gets all the money in one delivery. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is whenever you take a delivery of bond funds, you have to be able to spend the money within 3 years. Because remember, general obligation bonds to the investors who buy them are tax-free bonds. So they don't include the interest income on their federal income tax return, or their state income tax return. So in return for that, the Internal Revenue Service has certain rules that a school district has to comply. One of them is when you take a draw, you have to spend all the money within 3 years. So that's usually a check on how fast the school district can draw money, because you have to be able to spend the funds. The other check is, again, you want to keep the bond affordable to the community. So the community only begins paying taxes on the amount of funds you draw. So for example, if the school district passes a $100 million bond and draws $25 million, the community only pays on that $25 million. They don't pay on the 100 because it's not been accessed yet. So to keep that tax at an affordable level, a lot of times that dictates the money being drawn over a number of years. So that's an ingredient. The phasing of the draws, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. and the time, then the tax rate. So we mentioned the most we can ask voters to agree to pay is $60, 100,000 per election. But a lot of unified school districts don't ask for that much. Matter of fact, the Measure BB, we did not ask for that much. We targeted $25. Those of you on the board at the time might remember. So we didn't go for 60. We went for 25. And again, assessed valuation, not market. Length of the bond. We talked a little bit about, a lot of times voters are going to ask you, well, we approve this, for how long are we paying? So the length of the bond, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but that's the agreement. And the last thing is, and this is often overlooked, remember that the tax is levied by Riverside County according to assessed valuation. So we have to make some assumption about assessed valuation. What is it today? What is it likely to be over the length of the bond? So those are the ingredients that come up with the package that gets put before the voter. So a little bit more about each one of these. Bond amount, generally, it's designed to fund what the public is willing to pay for and what is a district you need. So most of the time, the needs of a school district are much larger than what the community is actually willing to pay. So the bond amount is usually structured to satisfy those two claims, if you will, of what the district needs, what the community will pay for. And it's constrained also by the tax rate that is communicated to the public. Right, a $60 tax rate, a school district could go for request a bigger one than if it's $20 tax rate. And you know, some districts go very high in terms of the bond. They want to put one bond measure on the ballot, they want to be done with it. They go for the most that they think the community will possibly agree to pay. Some districts, it's more bite-sized. Some districts, maybe every 4, 6, 8 years, go for a smaller bond. Every district's a little bit different. But that bond amount is an important factor, and that's something that voters see in the ballot materials when they cast a ballot. They see that bond amount. So that's one of the ingredients. The phasing and the timing. So keep in mind, the voters don't vote on it. If you pass a $100 million bond, the voters are not voting on how soon that money is going to be delivered. Is it going to be $25 million up front? Is it going to be $30 million up front? That's not locked in stone. That's not voted on by the voters. That's up to the board. But we have a baseline plan, and at the bottom of the slide, that's just what a typical prototype school district general obligation bond offer looks like. I would say the typical bond plan is accessed over about a 10-year period. One draw year 1, year 4, year 7, year 10. Why? Because you have to spend the money within 3 years. So you take a draw in year 1, spend the money in 3 years, you take a draw in year 4, et cetera, et cetera. But again, we customize that to the needs of the particular school district. And it almost always changes from when we go on the ballot to when we finish the program. Because again, that's not something voters vote on, that's not a boundary. But that's just to show you typically about a 10-year delivery period is most common for school districts on the phasing and the timing. And one more thing about the phasing and the timing. If you look at that second one, why is it often modified? Well, it's often modified because there are so many unknowns, right? The performance of property values in the school district, that's an unknown. The level of interest rates, that's an unknown. You put a bond measure on the ballot, you take the money over time, interest rates rise, interest rates fall, inflation rises, inflation falls. Part of our job is to keep on top of that and be able to advise the school board as to how to modify the bond plan to try to be true to what we said to voters in a bond plan. So we have to keep our eye on year to year these different factors that are outside of our control and how to modify our bond. Length of the bond. Most common, a school bond is like a home mortgage. 30 years, fixed interest rate. Why? Because for capital projects, building a new school, major capital repairs, that are long-lived improvements, 30-year bond is most common, with an exception. And we've had that exception measured BB. If we're going to use bond funds for shorter term furniture purchases or technology purchases, we don't want to have a 30-year bond purchase a 3-year iPad. So if we use bond funds for anything that's short, we make sure that the life of those bonds matches the life of the purchase. So if we do use bond funds for 3-year iPads, those bonds pay off in 3 years. But for building buildings or major long-life capital improvements, those can be 30 years. That's an ingredient that fits into the bond fund. Tax rate. A couple of things about tax rates. So again, we talked about $60. How do we know whether $60, $40, $20, how do we know where our community's comfort zone is? A lot of that comes out of the poll. The good pollster will test multiple tax rates. So any school board putting a bond measure on the ballot can be confident that it's within the community's comfort zone. Now again, if you look at that third bullet, one more time, we'll mention that the tax is on assessed valuation, not market value. And if you're curious, right now, the current year, the median assessed valuation for a residential property in our district, that's single-family homes, condos, townhomes, is a little over $419,000. Now, that often seems low, but remember that's assessable. That's what's on the tax bill. So somebody, let's say, who bought a house in the district in 1980 and paid $200,000 for it. They might be able to sell that house today for $600,000, $700,000, $800,000. But on the tax rolls, because of the 2% Prop 13, it might only be assessed at $250,000 or so. So that's what triggers the tax. So that 419, Jim was able to gather that information, is our current 50% above, 50% below for this property. Now, when we put Measure BB on the ballot, if you looked at the 75-word ballot question, nowhere in there did it mention taxes. Okay? So the law changed in 2018. There was a piece of legislation called EB 195, which mandates now that in a 75-word ballot question, we have to be crystal clear to the voter that bonds mean taxes. Now, this is just an example of a 75-word ballot question we just included in a poll for a school district that we just deleted the name for today's purposes. But you could see in red, that is now mandated per state law language. They tested in the poll $262 million. And then you can see levying 3 cents per 100. That's $30 per 100,000. You can either freeze it cents per 100, dollars per 100,000. They chose to test it cents per 100 single, so $30. So those, if we go ahead and do some polling here, those words in red we're going to have in our mock-up ballot question. That's required. What's not required, and where there's flexibility, is what's above that in the blue or the darker color. So that particular school district is testing roofs, plumbing, and so forth. But the reason I wanted to show you this, because this will look different if we go forward with a new bond, whatever it might be. It will look different than BB. BB, none of that language, levying 3 cents per 100, 15 million annually, none of that was in BB, because the law was different. So now, if it wasn't clear before, it's made clear to voters bonds and taxes. So that's a little bit more problematic. Last topic on these agreements. assess valuation. So if you ever go to let's say you go to a CSBA conference, you're talking to a trustee who says, you know, we got a problem, we passed a bond, we can't get the money. And you go, that's going to be passed a bond, you can't get the money. Well, if you use, district, you use in a bond plan an overly aggressive assessed valuation planning factor, yeah, you could pass the bond, but you can't get the money because you're not hitting that assumption. So we have to build in, it's a little bit like when James is submitting a budget for your, there has to be some assumption there about student enrollment. It's going to grow, it's going to be flat, it's going to decline. Similarly with assessed valuation, we don't want to be too conservative and undersell ourselves. We don't want to be too aggressive and overpromise things to the voters. So we have to use as a planning tool some assumption about property values and future growth. So for our district, not trying to give everyone a high example, but if you look at the left-hand side, that's the last 30 years for Marietta Valley Unified School District. That's what our assessed valuation's done. You can see early part of the year of the 2000s, very rapid growth in assessed valuation. You can see in the years of the Great Recession, we had some declines. And you can see in recent years, we've had more sustainable, steady growth. And then if you look at the top right, we show some data points. But if you look at 30 years, this district has grown about 6.75% per year. We would never use that in a bond plan. We would always throttle that back and make that more conservative. Normally in Riverside County, we use something like 4% as a planning tool. If we exceed that, you can get your bond money sooner than you expect. But we don't want to be more aggressive, and then you disappoint the community because you can't deliver the bond funds on time because growth slowed. You know, in Riverside County, when recessions hit, they tend to hit us harder than they do urban Los Angeles, let's say. So just as, you know, if we go forward again, whether it's 2024, 26, whatever it is, but if we put together a bond plan, we'll show you what we're using as an assumption. Maybe we'll modify it, but 4% is generally around our area. I think considered a prudent, conservative planning tool. We know it won't be 4%, and as you can see, there have been years where it's been higher, years where it's gone negative, years where it's been more steady and stable. But again, we're just trying to give you a little sense for when a school district puts a bond measure on the ballot and represents to the community, this is what we think the bond is going to cost you. Where does it come from? It comes from the bond amount, the timing and the phasing, and it comes from the length of the bond, and then it comes from this assessed valuation plan, just to try to give you a little feel.
When you're referring to, excuse me, is this ADA enrollment, number of houses being built? What's the growth we're measuring? Regulation?
Where do we get growth? So if we look at let's look at the very bottom line. Year over year, last year, this year, we grew 6.64%. Where did that come from? The first place it comes from is the 2% under Prop 13. So if you live in your own house, county assessor raises you 2% per year. Property didn't change hands, so that's one source. The second source is new construction. Every time a piece of vacant land, a house gets built on it, a new business gets built on it, it goes from the assessed value as vacant to improved. The third source is turnover. So my example, someone bought a house in 1980, now they sell it. It was on the assessor's roll, let's say at $250,000, because they've had it since 1980. A new family buys it for $700,000 or $800,000, it gets reassessed. And that might be too low, I don't know, but I'm just using that as a number. So those are the three major sources. The 2%, new development, property turnover. Now you might be curious, let's look at the years of the Great Recession, 09 to 10. District assessed valuation dropped 13%. Why was that? Well, we know housing values were dropping. So people were selling homes that they had bought here, and they were selling them at a loss. And the Riverside County assessor, even if you lived in your own home, took the initiative to reduce people's assessed values. So that can happen. It can go negative. It's uncommon, but it certainly happened for us in about a 4 or 5 year period. That's why we would never use that 6.76%, because we just want to have a little maneuvering room in case. We know recessions are going to come back. We just don't know when. We don't know how severe. There's always booms and busts. So we try to take that into account. But does that help, Linda? Just in terms of how we look? Yeah. So that's really, Nick, did you have a question?
Yeah, I do actually. You were talking about the length of the bond, and one of the things that I noted is we're dealing with 20 years of aging buildings, right? A lot of the 20 years. 30-year bonds and 20-year aging process. And with the state being negligent in funding schools, and we have to rely on bonds, that doesn't seem tenable. It sounds like we're always going to be behind the curve. So the length of the bond doesn't matter, because when one bond goes out, we're going to have to get another bond and just keep the cycle going to be able to fund our schools and keep things up to date.
I think you're 100% right.
Oops.
That's why most school districts, every decade, every 8 years, whatever it is, have to come back to the voters. Because it's almost, you're almost never caught up, right? You're always addressing a portion of your need.
And I was just out of curiosity, what state was it that was being responsible and how they governed their state?
So in New England,
Or that's not a state.
Massachusetts,
Thank you.
yeah, those states, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, yeah, it comes down.
Oh, they're responsible.
Yeah, the states, they have what they call a bond bank. So the state issues bonds at the state level. The school district makes an application, state grants it, and the money comes down. But we don't have that.
No, we don't. All right, thank you.
Was that helpful in terms of this first topic, kind of the basics?
Yeah, thank you, very clear.
So the next thing,
Excuse me?
oh,
I'm sorry, I just have a
yes,
question.
sure.
So the accountability that came with changing the threshold to pass the bonds, the bond oversight committee.
Yes,
So I noticed in our case, in our district, we have, as far as I understand, we've had the slot for a member of a taxpayer organization has been vacant. So what happens if you are not able to populate all the positions in your committee as far as accountability that's required by law?
so that's a great question. So for the Citizens Oversight Committee, you have a few, I'll say mandated positions, right? One is a representative from the Bona Fide Taxpayers Association. One, I think, is a parent of a child in the district. One, I think, is a parent of a child who's also involved in a PTA or a local site council. One is a local business owner, and one is a senior citizen. Almost universally, the hardest spot to fill is the Bona Fide Taxpayers Association. I think for most districts, you try as hard as you can to fill it. If you need a bona fide effort, you put an ad in the newspaper, you encourage people. If you can't fill it, you do the best you can with the members that you have, which you don't disband the committee. The committee's not functional if you can't, and that is almost always the hardest one to fill. Sometimes what districts will do is they'll encourage members of the community to join the Taxpayers Association group, Riverside County Taxpayers Association, or a statewide group, and then apply for the oversight committee. You can still have a functioning committee if you can't fill it. That's how it's going. All right, well, we can come back, obviously, when I'm finished and elaborating more on any of these particular topics, but we thought what would be valuable next is to talk a little bit about our district. What have we done over the years? Give you a little sense of our previous bond measures, some of the things that this district has done and the voters have agreed. So we have passed 4 bond measures since I've been working with the district going back to the late 1990s. The very first one was in 1998, Measure D, $37.5 million. And as you see right in that opening clause, the major issue then was overcrowding. And $37.5 million in 1998 was a lot of money. What did the district do with that measure? So if you look at bullet 2, it passed with almost 71% of the vote. Since it was so small, relatively speaking, it was accessed in 2 draws. Notice they were 3 years apart, 98 and 2001, that's against spending the money within 2 years. Probably what's most important is this is the last year of the tax for Measure D. I'm going to show you more about that in a minute. But after this year, Measure D will be fully repaid in those. So that's the oldest measure. Second oldest measure was in November of 2002. Again, relatively modest bond, $40.4 million. Pretty much the same introductory clause. Reduce, relieve severe overcrowding. So that was the main theme of this measure, which was called Measure K. This one again, 70.5% of the vote overwhelmingly approved. Again, relatively modest bond, so it was 2 draws, 03 and 05. That's still on the books through 2028-29. And then that's fully. That was the second one. The third bond, Measure E. Now this is a bigger one. This is 2006. This is $120 million. Again, we leave overcrowding right there in the opening clause. But it was fairly specific. That's why after the name of the school district, we put in red, complete construction of a third high school, build 2 elementary schools and a middle school. The language of this one was a little bit more specific than either Measure D or Measure K. But that was for $120 million. So, and this one again, now part of it was, the reason we were able to access this so quickly, this was before the Great Recession, so there were huge rise in property values in the district, and a very low interest rate environment. So, and the district had the need for the funds. So that's on the books for about another decade. After 2032-33, off comes Measure E. But the live bond measure, that many of you remember, I guess it's 2014, BB. Now, BB had a little bit of a different focus. You see in the second line of that introductory clause, education technology. So in addition to some basic repairs, we definitely had a technology element. And you see $98 million. Now, as you've seen all these bond measures, remember the example I showed you of how you have to do it now? See, there's nothing in here about tax. So that's how not the current required ballot language is different from everything we've done in the past, where there was nothing in here about taxation. Let me mention one thing just while we're looking at the ballot language that you might find of interest. Because often we'll get asked the question, what projects can we fund with our bond measure? So if you think about it, when voters approve a bond, they really approve 2 things. They approve this 75-word ballot question, which, if you notice, has to be a single sentence, has to end in a question. So a lot of times if we'll have an English teacher on the board, they'll look at that and go, you gotta be kidding me, but that's what's required. But in addition, there's a much longer project list that is not in 75 words, but is in the ballot book, the ballot pamphlet that gets mailed out to every voter. And what you can do with bond funds is the outer boundary of what's in the 75 words and what's in the project list. Doesn't mean you have to do all of those projects by any means. It's just what's allowed. So this would not have been for BB the outer boundary. The outer boundary would have been the combination of this plus the longer form project list. Because you'd only see so much in 75 words. Do you have a question there?
Yeah, so going back to Measure D, it says it'll be fully paid in 23-24.
Yes.
So when I get my tax bill for my house, at the end of 24, or June, July of 24, is it going to be $25 per $100,000 less than it was the year before?
You're gonna see that in a second, but the short answer is yes, if we didn't do anything. So you would've got a tax bill probably in October, but bill was mailed out from the county, October 23. Same bill, October of 24. Again, based on reasonable assumptions, you should see a drop. The drop is, we estimate probably about $26, and we got a graph, you'll see that in a second. But yes, that should be the case, because this bond is, as of September, this bond is going to be fully paid out. So you should see a drop.
But we're still paying on K, E, and
Yes,
G.
and we're going to show you that in a second, what that could look like in the future. So back to BB. So we looked at the ballot language. So with BB, it was a closer call. If you look at bullet 2, we needed 55%, we got called 58%, $98 million. Now, because we had the technology piece, this one was a little bit different in that we had more frequent draws on the bonds. And we made some strategic decisions, because if you remember, starting in about early 2021, we saw this rise in interest rates. It's still going today. So we made some strategic decisions. That draw you see under bullet 7, that was to try to get out ahead and get our hands on some money before interest rates kept going up. Now, bullet 9, we have not yet drawn all of BB. Now, sometimes board members will ask, well, do we have to draw all the money on our last bond before we could think about asking the community for a new bond? The answer is no. You can still have money on an old bond, and the community can approve a new bond. So don't think you have to extinguish one before you can ask the community for it. There's districts that have multiple bonds running. Now, we don't know how long this one's going to go, because we haven't tapped into that last $9.8 million yet. So, now to get to legislation. Let's just take stock of this one. So this has all of our bond measures applied. And remember that 4% I mentioned? Assessed valuation planning tool, year-over-year rate of change, remember how I mentioned that? Using 4%. What would be reasonable to assume tax rates are likely to be in the future if we did nothing, meaning no new bond? Just what we have, but taking, if you see that rectangle to the right, taking the last straw BP. Right now we've said 2027 just as a placeholder. So there you see the farthest bar to the left. That's the bill you got this year. I think it's $119.55, if my memory is correct. I think that's what it is. So at 4% growth, remember we've done better than that, but if we use that as a planning tool, we did not. We would estimate about a $26 drop for your bill that will come out October 2024. And then kind of a steady decline until, remember we said one of these goes off in 2032-33 Measure E, remember that one? So now look here at 2032-33, see? Then we have a drop. So if we did nothing, we would estimate that $119.95, around $92, $93 next year, kind of a gradual decline, then after 32-33, a deeper decline, and taxes in the teens, if you will. Out for now until 2051, and that 2051 may change when we take that final draw under Measure BB, so we don't know what the term that's going to be. So this is, but Jim, I think you assume that our math, it goes out to 2050.
That's right.
So let's assume it goes to 2050. So let's just take stock of that for a minute. Because as you think about the future and what you might want to do or not want to do, you do have an opportunity that not every school district has. And that you could think about, what if we asked voters to approve a new bond, but not pay any more than you're paying this year? In other words, keep that $119.55. Use the $26 and just extend that out. Just plant a thought in your mind. Because whenever a school district has that set of facts it's written, where you have a bond coming off, there is the opportunity to think about asking the community, we just want to keep you where you are this year. Hold that. But hopefully this is helpful in terms of the trajectory into the future in terms of bond tax rates. Hopefully that's helpful. A couple other things that we can come back to this. Now, one of the things your board's been very diligent about as long as I work with you is whenever interest rates fall, refinancing bonds, higher interest rate to lower interest rate, and saving money for the community. So whenever a bond is drawn, it always carries with it the ability to be refinanced. When a school district refinances bonds, the community gets 100% of the benefit. The school district gets none of it. You can't use the money for projects, you can't use it for your budget, it goes to the community. So since I've been working with you, we've done half a dozen refinances. And if you look at the bottom right-hand rectangle in green, we've saved almost $14 million. That's money that would have left town to go to investors anywhere, wherever they are in the country, and stay there. And one of the things Jim does is he monitors all the district's bonds, and whenever there's an opportunity where we see some higher interest rate bonds, we think we can refinance them, we bring that to James and Darren's attention, they bring that to your attention. We did one most recently in 2021. So that's always a feature, the ability to refinance bonds. Now, one more thing that we thought you might find interesting. Common in Riverside County, very common in Murrieta Valley Unified, Melrose districts, right? A lot of the newer homes, Melrose Community Facilities districts. There's a tax that goes with those community facilities districts. And some of those taxes are on for a while, but there's a number of Melrose districts where the taxes fall off in the next 10 to 15 years. So we had a slide about that, if you're interested. So these are the roster of Melrose districts where, call it in the next 15 years, the tax terminates. And it's mainly they terminate because the bonds from these Melrose districts have been paid off. So just to give you a little sense that Melrose taxes are not forever, and we do have some that we just did 15 years as the divider, fall off. There's others that go longer, we just give you a little bit. And then I think the last topic, and there may be questions and discussion. Let's just say you were thinking, what if we wanted to do something in 2024? And what if we wanted to do something with that $26 tax drop? How much would that get us? That's about $200 million. So if you thought about that drop, that if we did nothing would occur. Okay. But we're going to keep the tax rate at that $119.55 and use that $26. That's about $200 million. And again, the typical plan would be without any customers. Say $50 million, 4 draws, spaced out every 4 years, just to give you something to think about. And that's a function of how big our tax base is. Why does $26 get us 200 million? It's a function of the property values, the assessed values. So I'm gonna stop there. Covered a lot of ground. Hopefully some of this information has been helpful, but I definitely want to give board members an opportunity to either ask questions, we can go back, look at other slides, or if there's anything I didn't cover that you'd like to ask about. But hopefully this was helpful in some regard as you can think about the future of the district. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Very clear.
Thank you for the presentation, we very much appreciate that, and depending on how the board proceeds, we may be structuring something to look forward to. I would assume we would look at some phraseology or packaging that would then give us an indication of where we might go. So for now, thank you for your presentation and questions and answers.
My pleasure. Be here. Have a great
Good to
day.
see you.
Moving on, E2 is a discussion of the cell phone policy. Dr. Andrews.
So this was brought to our attention, concerns and questions late last spring around the use of cell phones in our schools and how that's happening with electronic devices. And so we were able to schedule this out. And so our Executive Director of Student Services, Mr. Howard Hitler, is going to share with us. And he also brought our principals to talk about how it's being applied in high schools. So, Howard.
Good evening, members of the board and Dr. Andrews. So I'm going to give you a little summary of the status of cell phones in the district. One thing we have seen over the years is there are ever more cell phones coming into our system as parents purchase phones for younger children. So we're even now starting to see more at the elementary level. In the presentation today, we're going to talk a little bit about law and policy, or policy, of course, how our cell phone expectations are communicated, a little bit about discipline, or how many cell phone violations we have, and then Mr. Tupa is going to talk about some of the practices at our high school high school level where they don't have a lockdown on cell phones. Also, Mr. Tupa is very well experienced in dealing with cell phone violations and the whole culture of cell phones at school. He was a dean, which became an assistant principal, 6 years in that role. So anyway, he'll be here to answer some of the more practical questions as we go through. So the key law and code, the governing board of each school district or its designee may regulate the possession or use of any electronic signaling device that operates through the transmission or receipt of radio waves. A few more laws. The governing board of the school district may adopt a policy to limit or prohibit the use by its pupils of smartphones at the school site. There are some exceptions to that in the law. One being if an administrator or a teacher allows the cell phones. There are uses of cell phones for medical reasons. Some of our diabetic students have access all the time. Students on individual education plans may have access. And of course, in emergency situations, which that is the reason many parents purchase cell phones for their children. Our policy, or your policy, students may use cell phones, smartwatches, pagers, or other mobile communication devices on campus during non-instructional time as long, and it talks about it being in accordance with the law and the individual school sites' policies. There is at the very bottom there is actually a law in place, an education code, that which prohibits the recording in a classroom of a teacher. The teacher has to, or the principal has to agree you cannot record. Actually, in a meeting, a parent can't record without two-party consent. I think this is what we use. There are many ways we communicate, and I don't want to cross over today too much into the whole internet use and access, but there are some crossovers. Our acceptable use policy We actually, Mr. Pratt informed me today, we do draft this and we are working on a new draft moving forward, also responsible use. And every year at the start of the year, parents and their children during the registration process are asked to review an acceptable use or responsible use. It talks about personal safety, illegal activities, inappropriate language, all sorts of important things that we ask our parents to review with their children when they're accessing technology. There's some other things that happen every year at the secondary level. They do behavior expectations assemblies. Actually, this year, Mr. Valpin organized a safety net presentation for all grade levels to talk about appropriate use of technology, and teachers express their expectations. So let's look quickly at our various policies. This is an example of Lisa J. Bales. We actually are, as we talk as a group, we are going to come out. This is a learning lesson. One of the things we came up with is let's get our best elementary school policy and share it with all of them so they're all consistent, because we haven't done that in the past. So through this process, we are coming up with things that we need to do better. Anyway, you can see the elementary schools, and this is consistent. I've reviewed pretty much all elementary school cell phone policies. They have a prohibition. Cell phones are to be in the backpack. They do allow smart watches, but they are to be on the airplane mode. So there at the elementary level are pretty much cell phone free. Middle school policy, I know in the past we've had some concerns expressed from teachers at the middle school level. This past year, they united in a uniform policy, which means they are locked down. They ask for cell phones to be turned off and put in backpacks, as along with the smart watches. And that's all 4 of our middle schools that are consistent. It's interesting because there were different policies at different sites. In the past, we had asked school sites to work with staff, parents, etc., to come up with a policy. This was actually, and we've heard rave reviews for the middle school level in terms of their policy. Now, at the high school level, gotta catch up with myself. At the high school level, you can see a typical policy, and I believe they're very consistent. This happens to be Vista Marietta. It starts and it talks at the top about the fact that they are permitted at breaks and lunches. We also read in here that there are individual teacher expectations. Some teachers do use them as tools. We'll talk about that later. Then it lists through all of the consequences, typically very similar: loss of cell phone for using it in class, second offense loss goes down to the office. There can be greater consequences as you go through with the cell phone. But typically, if they're misusing the class, they are taken away from the student and they are lost. And in the discipline aspect of it, you can see again from our board policy, it allows the employee to take the cell phone away, store the device in a secure location, and it can then be turned over to administration. There is something that actually occasionally comes our way in the policy that I decided to bring up. There is sometimes serious or discipline that results from when students misuse technology or cell phones at night and they cross over and they're disruptive to our school environment. And we have that occasionally, threats and that sort of thing. And so there is discipline that will occur for that. So let's look real quickly at the cell phone or use of technology incidents that we've had. You can see in middle school, we had 767 incidents involving 501 students. So we have some repeat offenders that get to the next level. If you look at the groups, you see there's one outlier. So we did not make a mistake. We actually consulted with Shebang Middle School, and they were very loose on enforcement, and they have now joined. And then you look at Warm Springs, one of our smaller campuses, not quite 900 students, and they had 359 incidents. They had just stepped up enforcement last year to kind of be in line with McElhaney and move forward. So they had a number of incidents. And the one thing when I talked with the assistant principal of student support, she said just removing, because the photography is a big issue. Just by enforcing and changing the policy, they've had a lot of labelless issues with the photography. If you look at the high school, yes.
Could you just define what an incident it could be?
That's where a student is, what would tend to happen is if a student has their cell phone removed, they could have a warning, or teacher takes it, they would notify the student support, and they would log it in ARIES, a certain discipline, and then they'd have cell phone violations, so they're tracking it through.
But an incident would be like disruptive to instruction minutes.
Yeah, and it's not gonna be where a kid has their cell phone up in class.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that would be, an incident in middle school, it would be somebody out on, now when it's a lockdown, they don't allow them even in middle school. And this is again, also always been about, you just not allowed to have your cell phone out. So, they would ask you to go down to the office and deal with the family.
So as well at the middle school level, teachers aren't using cell phones for instructional time apps, that kind of thing. Is that correct?
There are, it's interesting, again, but speaking to Warm Springs, I know we have a McElhaney teacher here. I know that there are uses on occasion. I generally, I've heard that they prefer not to have it out too much, but I know in Warm Springs, they talk about some teachers using them for surveys or that sort of thing in class. But it's a little difficult because the universality of cell phones is quite not the same in middle school as high school. High school almost, most kids have it by far. So,
Thank you.
high school, you can see the number of incidents, and always repeat students, 685 incidents and 556 students, and relatively consistent throughout.
And just really quick, would you say, because here in the valley, their population is a lot lower. Just a reminder of what the population difference is between Vista. Is Vista Marietta High School and Marietta Mesa, their enrollment similar?
So they were, right around 2,200, right?
And Mesa are within 20 or 30 students.
Yeah, and then Vista,
It's really not.
yeah, 3,450 about this year, somewhere 3,400. So this would be from last year, so I think this was closer to 3,500.
Okay. Well, I was just noticing the largest school has the fewest incidents, probably similar, maybe not quite as much enforcement. Like it might reflect some enforcement issues as well.
And
I mean, statistically, it looks like a difference.
it could, it very much could. There are always going to be slight differences. Well, yeah, you're right, it's a significant difference. I would have to look at the data over multiple years. The reason I only looked at last year is everything pre-last year was.
It wasn't a criticism, it's mostly, I understand it does fluctuate, and it just so happened, it stood out to me that the largest school, at least in my mind's eye, had the fewest incidents, and I thought it might have the same situation.
Valid. So let's talk about cell phone uses and practices. I find this really interesting, and Mr. Tupa actually shared he sent me over these photos, and he could talk a little bit to how we're actually using cell phone appropriately.
So there's no doubt that cell phones have created dilemmas at schools, specifically over the last decade. I think specifically in the last 3 to 4 years post-pandemic, looking at how to utilize them to a benefit, right? So one of the things you'll see in the middle picture that we implemented this year, and I think a lot of schools are starting to go this route, and it's actually, we're getting output from the kids that's positive, right? So every classroom has a cell phone holder, and I would say that more than 90% of the teachers are utilizing this. And so students come in, they put their cell phone there, and the feedback from not only the staff, but the students is that it's helping them pay attention. We've also had a decline in the amount of cell phone referrals because there's a place for the cell phone to be. So it'll be interesting to see what the data says at the end of the year, because it's going to be down. Just because for many years that was a high trend. I was in the office, so I experienced that. And sometimes the parents would leave the cell phone for a month before they picked it up because they were having more challenges at home than we were experiencing at school. On the left-hand side is an example of a digital ID in the world today, right? A lot of people do not bring things, such as a purse or anything, maybe not even their wallet. Most high school kids don't even drive anymore, so a wallet is kind of obsolete at times, but they always have their phone. And so that helps us with the check-in system. So that's a student checking in, they're tardy for school. And then that's our way of tracking that, providing discipline for when students are late, but they always have their phone. So our attendance office is able to use that as a checking in. On the right-hand side, that is office hours, right? That's intervention period on Thursdays and Fridays. This is Mr. Deephouse's hand on the right, our assistant principal, scanning in a student for office hours so that we know that they are an honor hawk in this one. They have over a 3.5 GPA. They're coming into the library to use the library for support on their academics. And that's how we track that we know what they're counted to be for at that time. And then another thing that before we were kind of utilizing the cell phones and the digital ID, this is a big one. Whenever we do emergency drills, if you go back 9, 10 years, get a flash drive, get a computer, the guidance deck, and about every 30 days you have to download all the students in the school. And then you have to make sure that there was a ability to have a computer that if there was a true disaster, right, we're having to track everybody for the school, that we have internet down in the field somewhere, and that you could put the flash drive in, have everybody's phone numbers and contact information, and you can see that would be a pretty tedious task and probably something that I didn't do every 30 days, but you would actually need to make sure you're prepared for that. Now our teachers have the 5-Star app on their phones, so just like they can take attendance for office hours on their phone, when there's an emergency drill, we actually have them take attendance through their phone, through the 5-Star app, where there's a tab on it that says emergency drill. And then if we have 2,250 kids, we'll go in after a drill and see that 2,172 were checked in, but there was actually 2,193 at school. Kind of see which teacher didn't track it, right? Just going through that practice round of preparing yourself for a drill. So those are some of the functional uses of cell phones. I would say, like you guys asked Mr. Dimmler, how often are cell phones getting used in class? I would say a lot less than they were 6 or 7 years ago because we're one-to-one devices now. Before being one-to-one, there would be times where people would have students take out their cell phones. If there was, it could be a survey, it could be just looking up something, but it's very minimal at this point.
Question. Looking at the center slide, the teachers pay for those out of their own pocket?
They don't. Before this year, there were a few teachers that had purchased them on their own, but it was requested that teachers would like to have it, and so we purchased them for all classrooms. It's not mandatory that they use them, but I would say that most teachers are using them. There were a few teachers at the beginning of the year that chose not to, and within a month, we're like, hey, can I have one too? Because even if they don't do it all the time, they may want to do it sometimes, right? A test. The kids are just not on task that day, etc.
Any comments specifically? Let's take a middle school and high school. Any comments about what's happening in class now as opposed to 3 years ago or 4 years ago in terms of attention and diligence and that sort of?
Just student work ethic, or is it how it relates?
Student work ethic, yeah.
I think grit and resiliency is something that we're working on as a society. I think the cell phones away from the students are improving that, but when you're trying to battle the cell phones without something like that, or you're trying to create an atmosphere where I'm going to trust you, show me if you can do it, we're not very successful with that. So that system seems to be the one that we're getting better results from. Doesn't mean everything's perfect, but kids' attentiveness, you have to do all of those type of things to make it as good as possible. Because there is some
I'll just share a comment from two of our middle school principals. They've noticed this because the middle school rules are different than the high school. The middle school, they're in their backpacks throughout the day. Their comments have been, this is from two middle schools that have recently adopted this policy, so these new ones, that they see more students talking together, sitting at tables and chatting together because they're not looking at the device, because it's often in their backpack. So even kind of that social connection and so forth has been an improvement at the middle schools, like on their lunches and breaks.
I would think it also in class, there would be an advantage because you have to listen and do what the teacher is asking.
There isn't the option. It has to be one way.
Yeah.
I realize I'm totally in the minority here, but as a parent of a child still in the school district, my child will not put their cell phone into a cell phone pouch. That's a personal expenditure for us. And, I realize it's not rampant stealing, rampant damage, that kind of thing. But just for my husband and I, that represents a huge amount of money. And we have a rule, nobody touches your cell phone but food. And so what accommodations could be made for parents who feel that strongly? Going along, I would 100% support the teacher saying, I don't want to see it, I don't want to hear it, it's in your back 100%. And if it isn't, I would be the first person to say, take that phone from my child. And I know my children went to McElhaney, and when they were making the transition into McElhaney, I called other parents to say, we're thinking about getting cell phones for the girls. How does that even work? And they were like, no, it's not a big deal. They don't have their phones out. It's just the way it is. And that's just the way it is. And we've told both of the girls, if I get a call and I have to come get that phone, it's mine probably forever. And we never had a problem. But what accommodations do we have for parents who would say, 100% my student will follow the rule, but we're not putting it in that pouch?
there would be no problem with that. We haven't experienced any of that, but we would definitely be okay with it.
Okay, give me a
Yeah.
chance.
Yeah, it would be, it wouldn't be a problem.
Okay.
It's not about like trying to play us versus them, it's just about supporting the learning environment, so,
Sure.
I don't foresee that ever being an issue.
Have there been instances of theft, loss, damage, or I'm just thinking of the normal kid?
I know this sounds crazy, but like you said, I worked in student support for a long time, and, we never had a cell phone loss stolen.
Okay.
I think when cell phones first came out, really 20 years ago, whatever, I think stealing because not everybody had one, but they can be found so easily. And when students lose their phone, it is found. Usually their friend has it, they left it on the lunch table, their friend has it in science class, and they do the ping, and there it is in room 624.
That is very reassuring, thank you.
And SROs do a great job of that. They work with our students, our families, and, but I don't think any teacher in the district is gonna fight, a parent that says, hey, I need to have it in their backpack.
Well, if it's turned off and in the
Yeah.
backpack,
Of
they wouldn't
course,
even.
non-disruptive, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never, as in my classroom, I never had a phone stolen either. Students would, and I insisted they keep them turned off in their backpack, but sometimes they had them under their desk. Then they walked out and forgot their phone. I just put it on my desk, and within 30 seconds, they're gonna be back for it. But I've never had it happen.
Okay.
And they'll turn in each other's phones too, to whatever teacher is there.
I think kids are actually responding pretty well. They now have a cell phone for most of them since they were pretty young.
Yeah.
And I think they recognize at least a little bit that it's a distraction. And like Dr. Andrews said, I think they don't mind the time away from it, to be honest with you. I think it's kind of it's a feeling that they don't get very often. And I think that's what the teachers are noticing, that there's kind of an appreciation for the consistency.
Would there, and this is just a question that might be in somebody's mind, but they're not saying it. Would there be any use or value in a rule that said that, with the exception of what you're talking about, when somebody comes to class, everything goes there, into the pouch?
A rule?
A rule, yeah, general rule.
I don't think so. just because every teacher's classroom could have a different expectation of what they think is right for that time. So I think every classroom finds what works for that room. But we always, any administrator at school is going to work with, the teacher on what works for that, or if they feel like they need support administratively. But I mean, rules, I think it's about the expectations, and if the expectation is that your phone's going to be off, or it's going to be there, or either or, I think that's just the main thing, is to,
Okay.
yeah.
And these pouches are available for any teacher who wants them.
At my school, yeah, and they're not too much. I mean, I know there's other schools that have kind of gone that route too, so.
Other schools beyond it.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question about the digital IDs. So, so as far as privacy goes, is the information on those, is that shared with anybody? I mean, what company owns those?
So you would have the answer to that, but it is all, everything's processed. I start as a works with our tech team.
Sort of invite our Chief Technology Officer, Mr. John Pratt, to the podium.
Hey, open to the chief.
It's actually the law, AB 1584, otherwise known as, I believe, cold as well, apologize for the voice, but otherwise known as, requires us to have a data privacy agreement for any external entity that has student data. So 5-star, which is this one that Mr. Tupelo is using, we have that on file. It has all sorts of stuff about what they need to do for privacy. One of the things that it really targets is things like marketing that you can't use. It's compulsory school until age 16. This data gets synced off to these external organizations. They can't use that data for any kind of marketing or anything else. There's a lot of other things that sparks a bit as well, but all external entities to our global systems here have to have that student data privacy agreement on it. And 5-star has one.
Any other questions? Thoughts? All right, moving on to item G, the consent calendar. Consent calendar items are voted on collectively as group. Upon board member request, items may be removed from the consent calendar for discussion and individual action. Do I have a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar item G1? So moved.
I'll second it.
Moved and seconded. Any comments? Hearing none. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Moving to H, action information items, approval of personnel report.
I need to interrupt.
No, go ahead, it's fine.
We did miss.
We did miss public.
Oh, no.
Oh,
We just missed doing from English, so we just need to go back and catch that.
Oh, that's poor. Taking my notes over the notes. E, public comment regarding meeting agenda items. And I've read that already. Well, I'm gonna read it again, because somebody, I'll get a drawer open. Put them in the drawer every time, pile up. At this time, the governing board welcomes public comments pursuant to Education Code 35145.5. Public comment in special board meetings may only be received concerning items posted on the agenda, period. Individuals wishing to address the board are requested to complete a request to address the Board of Education card located at the entrance to the boardroom and submit that card to the executive assistant to the superintendent board. In accordance with Board Bylaw 9323, individual speakers shall be allowed up to 3 minutes to address the board on each agenda item. The board shall limit the total time for public input on each item to 20 minutes. Do we have any comments?
We do, we have 17 comments on item H3, which is the second reading of board policy 5013, and we have 1 comment on item H2, which is the administrative review of 6161.
All right,
So I'm going to make the assumption based on past practice that all speakers will have 3 minutes.
yeah, this group, yeah. This is Alice Corday, who will be followed by Pam Barrett. Welcome.
I'm yielding my time to Pam Barrett.
Okay, thank you.
I'm number 3, Lynn, and I am yielding my time to Pam.
Okay.
Good evening. Tonight, we insist you adopt the language from the October 12th first read of the confidential medical services parental consent policy. Parents feel strongly that they are entitled to be the ones to consent if their child is to leave campus during the school day for medical services. This is all about parental rights. A recent Rasmussen poll shows that 84% of California voters support local policy supporting parental rights. Remember, the U.S. Constitution guarantees parental rights, and parental rights are the first and foremost in the effort to improve student achievement. Are you guys listening to what the community has been saying these past months? They feel that their parental rights are not being respected. Because the district is pushing for a bond measure, apparently a history lesson is in order because history does repeat itself. 2 weeks ago, the Clifford Moss rep presented a number of slides highlighting a bond strategy. In fact, her slide number 5, Your Story, gave a history of the bond measures, but it was incomplete and didn't tell the real story, leaving out the details for why 3 bond measures failed in the 1990s, Measure G, C, and S. Well, I lived that school board history as a member of the bond committees for Measures G, C, and S, along with other dedicated community members like Margie Ray, Jean Vitamani, and Robin Christ. If you doubt my testimony, I'd be so happy to share all the many newspaper articles, photographs, and campaign materials with you that I've saved. The reason that those bond measures failed in 1995 and 96 is because we didn't have buy-in from most parents in Marietta. As we knocked on door after door, we heard over and over again from parents that they would rather have their students able to read, write, and spell and compute math successfully, housed in portable buildings surrounded by dirt, rather than extended taxes for 10 years to build Taj Mahals housing low student achievers. Parents were frustrated that the district was not listening to their concerns about their children. Parents were continually told by the district admin and staff to listen to the educational experts because the district didn't listen. We lost Measure G, our best shot, by 5 stinking votes. It was beyond devastating. And we had all the necessary talking points for passing a bond in 95 and 96. Our schools were made of portable buildings, surrounded by DG and overcrowded. Students at Chavela sat during assemblies on asphalt. And take a look at how many kids are exiting the campus from this photo. By extending the life of the current bond for 10 years, the yearly property taxes would not increase for the homeowners, as Tim Carey told us back in 1995. We had that all on all of our propaganda. And we had volunteers galore who knocked on doors to educate the public and then get out the vote. We even used our children. Here's my daughter, and these are some of my students in 1996. Wow, fast forward to 2023, and we are experiencing the same issue. You aren't listening very well. Just like in 1995, parents today feel disrespected by the district admin and school personnel regarding behavior, achievement, and the parental right to be notified of any information concerning their greatest treasure, their children. Even today, your rewriting of the policy at hand, which had its first read last meeting, is yet another example of your disrespect for parents. Your rewrite waters down the policy, making it more about the record of the absence from school rather than the parent consent for the absence. Again, you don't listen. When the Clifford Moss rep shared her bond prep slides, one word served as an overarching theme: listen. Especially in slide 8, listening is a lost art. Listen well. Listen takes time. And slide 20 proclaims stakeholder engagement. Listening continues throughout. And slide 25, quality listening and public engagement. You might want to enlist that recommended strategy of listening to the community members. We are asking you to adopt the October 12th confidential medical services parental services policy tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Tony Goodell, and who will be followed by Jack Guerrero. Welcome.
Hi guys. My name is Tony Hull. I've been in this area for about 27 years now, and I have three grandchildren. My three grandsons live in Chicago, and we have a guardianship of one of them. And I was here when you guys voted to approve the parental notification, and I was part of here as part of one of the speakers and stuff. I don't know. I have no idea why they're trying to rewrite it or just doesn't make sense. So all you guys are doing is whoever's trying to rewrite this stuff is just you're allowing the student to have an opportunity to leave without telling the parents. I mean, if I was one of those kids back in the day, I would do this kid, I would be leaving school. I'd have to, if I didn't have the parent were notified beforehand, and so you're allowing these kids, and you guys are worried about the parents. There's not an excuse if the parents aren't, or after this, an after effect type of deal. Or you need the parents to know beforehand, before the kids, get excused to go anywhere. I know, that's for me. I got my adult children stuff, but like I said, my grandchildren that I'm responsible for, I want to know what's when he's being excused. And I don't appreciate anybody from the school district making that decision for me, or my wife. So. Anyways, I'm about family and taking care of, family. We're supposed to be the ones that are supposed to be taking care of our family and stuff. And I appreciate you guys and just keep it the original thing. Like I said, this is the last thing for me, so I wasn't prepared to talk, but I'm here to support the families and the parents and stuff. So just leave it with me. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jack Guerrero will be followed by Courtney Cooper.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members of the board. My name is Jack Guerrero, area resident, and in the interest of full disclosure, I'm also a candidate for county supervisor. And I will say at the outset, members of the board, that you run your meetings very informatively and very efficiently, so it's a real pleasure for me to be back. I'm here today to speak on item number 3 regarding policy and administrative regulations governing student absences for medical procedures. Specifically, I am here to support the language in the original first reading of the policy approved on October 12th, which prescribes affirmative parental consent before, not after, excusing students for confidential medical services. This is the intention of the original reading. This reflects the will of the residents who have elected this board to represent them and their family values. This is consistent with the Education Code, which permits local school boards to determine the specific parameters of this policy. And most importantly, this is the best educational and health interests of children in this district, who benefit most when parents are involved in each step of the way, before, during, and after. Regrettably, the proposed modification is unacceptable. In fact, it appears a little sneaky, I'm afraid. It moderates the scope of the parental consent from the nature of the absence itself, which is a critical element of the policy, to a mere after-the-fact bookkeeping classification, which at best waters down consent before the fact to notification after the fact. This violates the trust we hope to nurture between school authorities and parents. Please continue to conduct yourselves ethically, responsibly, and constitutionally to further safe and healthy educational experiences and outcomes for children in this community. Your oath of office requires this, and moral authority demands this. Thank you.
Courtney Cooper, who will be followed by Dave Barrett.
I'm supposed to follow Courtney and Dave Barrett, and I yield my time to Courtney.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Courtney Cooper. I'm a local nurse practitioner. I'm also the lead chapter of Mom Army of Marietta, as well as a parent to 2 children in Marietta Valley Unified School District. I'm here to speak on the policy to prevent students from leaving campus for medical services. When I was in high school, the only facility or clinic out here where adolescents could get oral contraceptives or abortion services was neighborhood healthcare in Temecula. So prior to obviously 20 years later, there was no Planned Parenthood. As you know, the push with schools is to create a bridge from the student, adolescent, patient, or client, someone called them victims, to then bridge them over to these clinics where abortion services, oral contraceptives, cross-sex hormones, and whatnot are provided to the students or adolescents. The bridge right now would be the schools. That's the only way they're getting there. Whether they call an Uber on private time or whether they have their friend take them before school or after school is a whole nother story. When you're an adolescent, when would you want your parents to be involved in anything you were doing? When you were doing something right? When you were doing something wrong, you wanted them to not find out because you know you're going to be in big trouble. So right now, what I propose is that you adopt the original policy so that it's broad enough to not violate state California Teen Health Reproductive Acts, because that's huge. They still have to have access. But if they want to ditch school and get those services before or after, it has nothing to do with you. By you keeping the parents involved, I mean, I get a notification of my kids' tardy if my kids missed a class. So why would I not get a notification that they're not on campus when I drop them off to you from 8:30 to 3:30? So with that being said, what we have to do is keep the fact that you are supposed to be upholding my values as a parent. And I can tell you right now that if either one of my children went to our now local Marietta Planned Parenthood during school hours of 8:30 to 3:30, and something happened, whether my daughter had uterine hemorrhage or anything, and I'm at work because I work at our local ER, and she came in bleeding out, and I thought she was at school from 8:30 to 3:30, I can tell you right now that I will sue the district for allowing my child to leave campus without my parental consent. The push is to be LA Unified School District. We've had a massive influx of people moving from LA County, San Bernardino County over the last 4 years. In 2019, LA got the grant to propose what's called well-being services on campus. Yeah, well-being centers. They're linked with Planned Parenthood. Their aim is to create a safe space in each school where students can receive the education and health services they need to lead healthy lifestyles. But in fact, these branded well-being centers in high school clinics will be staffed by 2 public health officials trained by Planned Parenthood themselves. So Margaret, right, what's her name? Margaret Singer, she's having a party in hell right now because never did she ever think the American people would adopt Planned Parenthood and incorporate it into the education system. But now here we are. So LA, what they have is stationed full-time in each school to provide education and counseling In addition, a Planned Parenthood nurse practitioner or medical provider will come into the clinics 1 day per week to provide a range of sexual health services free of charge, including testing and treatment for STIs, emergency contraceptive, including Plan B, birth control counseling and provision, well-person exams, pregnancy testing, pregnancy options counseling, and abortion referrals for an estimated 75,000 teens in the LA Unified School District. So don't think that it's not coming out here. And if Planned Parenthood hadn't opened in Marietta, maybe this wouldn't be such a big issue. But in this district, I'm telling you right now, you better get ready for lawsuits if you allow any one of your students to leave campus to be transported, because you'll be liable when the student leaves and when the student returns. And I promise you, you will be liable for any medical malpractice that happens to that student when they return home. We're talking blood clots, hemorrhage, infection, you name it. I can tell you right now, to date, in ER, if a child comes into Inland Valley or Rancho, TEH or Loma Linda, our 4 local hospitals, they cannot get medication, they cannot get surgery, they cannot get any procedure. We don't do abortion services in emergency medicine without parental consent. Unless if imminent death is near and obviously the intervention is needed to sustain life, nothing is done without parental consent. No surgeon will touch a child ever. So under this guise, all these years of this whole California Teen Reproductive Health Act, children have had access to these reproductive services, but it is not indeed true healthcare. It's elective. And they need to, if they're going to come to a teacher or an administration on the school campus, they're still coming to a parent or an adult. That adult is then acting as a substitutionary parent to then grant them access to go get those services. If they're going to do it, they're going to do it behind your back no matter what. But if you guys provide transportation and access, the liability is going to fall on the district. Thank you so much.
Mary Barkey, followed by Josephina Hartley. Welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate President Diffley, board members, superintendent. I appreciate the time to speak to you. She actually stole my thunder because I was going to talk about the liability. I mean, not even just for the procedure. I mean, just been a car accident, just leaving campus, and a parent doesn't know. It's a huge liability, and I know under section 46010.1 that you have the option to let parents know if their child wants to leave campus, that you don't have to do that, and I would strongly advise that you don't. The exposure and parental rights. Parents deserve to make decisions for their children. They deserve to know what's going on in their lives. It's a constitutional right, and it's just the right thing to do. As parents, we love our children, and I think we want to be involved. We want to help them make that decision. So one thing, if they're going to do it, behind their parents' back, before school, after school, but I think during school, we owe it to the parents to honor their parental rights. So I appreciate your time tonight.
Hi, welcome. Following Josephina will be Yvette Anthony.
Hello, Josephina Hartley, and I collected signatures for this, and I have a few more that I forgot her name. Oh, to Julie, yes. So I collected a couple hundred signatures, and some of the responses that I got from the parents, they were like, that's problematic, it's unacceptable, and they were shocked because they thought that the medical emergencies was only for medical emergencies, not elective confidential medical services. Another mom and dad actually wanted to look up what they had signed, and they went inside, and then they came back and signed the petition because they could see that that was in there, and they did not know. Other questions was like, what confidential medical procedures are they talking about? I couldn't answer. Many questions from the Hispanic families. They said they had no idea that that's what they had signed. That in there, they thought it was just emergency medical. They did not pay attention to the confidential medical procedures. So I tell the parents, madres y padres de familia, infórmense de lo que aprendan sus hijos. And I said that, you should listen to the parents. I say, no more money if their voices are not being heard. Because I also check my tax thing and I see that, I'm being taxed, and I think that they're taxing us in the way that they tax us is against the law. So if the parents are not heard, maybe they will not vote for more money for this bond. Thank you.
Thank you. Yvette Anthony, followed by Riley. Welcome.
Okay, Josie pretty much said exactly what I was gonna say, and it doesn't surprise me because we collected signatures together some of the time. So I am here to speak on item H3, revisions to board policy 5113, parental consent. But first, let me begin with my frustration with what seems like should have been an easy ask from Ms. Vandegrift has turned into a nearly year-long saga with Mr. Andrus acting as the gatekeeper, preventing this item from being agendized. Meanwhile, as we waited, a small group of us collected hundreds of signatures to show the support from the community that was surprised such a policy exists. We showed them the MVUSD annual notification, the paragraph on page 9, confidential medical services, and as they read it, they shook their heads and said, "Where do I sign?" So I too have another 130 signatures, but I am not going to turn them into you because many people wrote their phone numbers down, and I didn't want to redact them. So I am planning to use them if this bond policy continues to go forward and we continue to be disrespected and ignored. Currently, every homeowner in this city pays 12% of their assessed value to Murrieta School District. While MVUSD's BP 5113 is an affront to parental rights, and frankly, the rewording presented in the second reading is also an affront. Why has a reference to a safety policy been inserted? The wording from the first reading is the one we want, and that is the one we ask for your consideration to be passed tonight. Thank you.
Riley, followed by, Maria Requiena. Close.
Hi. Thank you so much for having us available and be able to share our information. I'm a tax-paying community member and very concerned with the reworded item and regarding parental notification. And I would also like to encourage the adoption of the language from the first reading on October 12th. But there's so much concern often and concern with, oh my gosh, we're going to be sued, legal precedents. But the law is on our side for each of us. So California State Education Code Section 51101 already upholds the right of parents to be the sole arbiter of decisions affecting their children by being mutually supportive and respectful partners in the education of their children, to be informed by the schools and to participate in the education. That's Ed Code right now already. Also, Wisconsin versus Yoder, back in '72, Justice Berger, parental direction of the upbringing of their children in their formative years has a place in our society. A state's interest in education, however highly we rank it, is not free to impinge on the fundamental rights and the traditional interest of parents. May not impinge since 1972. Washington versus Bluffsburg, 97. The 14th Amendment provides heightened protection against government interference with parents' fundamental right to make decisions concerning their care, custody, and control of their children. I don't know why we're even having to talk about this. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that we're having to do this. The law is on our side. Troxel versus Granville 2000, Justice Ginsburg. The primary role of the parents in the upbringing of their children is now established beyond debate. Parham versus JR 442 US 584-602. Back in 79, the law's concept of the family rests on presumption that parents possess what a child lacks in maturity, experience, and capacity for judgment required for making life's difficult decisions. So please, tonight, as a community member, we're asking you to adopt the language as presented on October 12th. Thank you so much.
Were you Riley or Maria?
Riley.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. It was a little confusing on the card.
Right?
Let's see. Maria, followed by Bob Cowell.
Good evening, Mr. President, Madam Clerk, and members of the board. I'm here not only as a retired Marietta educator, but as a tax-paying community member who believes that parents have a right and a duty to be involved in any and all decisions surrounding medical treatments of their minor children under the age of 18. This, of course, is ensured by the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Marietta Valley touts itself as pro-parent and involvement. Its mission statement reads, parental support, and involvement is necessary for student optimum success in education. Students, parents, and staff can best realize full potential in an atmosphere of mutual respect, caring, and understanding. Please note the words parents and atmosphere of mutual respect. Based on the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, it is the rights of the parents to direct the upbringing of their children. This, of course, includes students not being released for confidential medical services without parent consent. While the Education Code allows students in grades 7 to 12 to be released, Marietta Valley School District must make it clear that district and school authorities will not do so. At the last board meeting, it was stated by Dr. Andrus and two board members that written policy change specifying Marietta Valley will not excuse students is not needed because no such situations have occurred in the district. Not having occurred in the past does not mean it won't occur in the future. Do we not practice fire drills, earthquake drills, and now sadly active shooter drills to be prepared should these occur? Dr. Andrus and board members, without the adoption of the wording as it was read on October 12th, how will the district respond to the following situations if they occurred tomorrow? A 15-year-old girl believes she's pregnant or has gender issues. She does not want her parents to know and request information or on places that provide these services, possibly to be excused from school to receive such services. How would such a situation be handled based on the current policy? I do want a response to that. Please listen to those who elected you. This has taken way too long, and tonight, that policy that was written on October 12th, the wording was changed to some form to make it more about attendance procedures than parent notification for medical services. It seems that what you heard, what has been said for months, you have not been listening. This community has unequivocally expressed their views on their constitutional rights as parents and to exercise their duties. Do what is best for students and what you know is the right thing to do. Vote to change the policy in writing as stated in the first read on October 12th. Make it a policy of MVUSD in a manner that it leaves no doubt that the district will not excuse students for the purpose of obtaining confidential medical services without parent or guardian consent, as it was read on October 12th. Thank you all for your attention.
Following Bob Cowell will be Jose Carrera.
A lot of people talked already about why you should be so concerned as for the board members. And I don't need to repeat that part of what I was going to say, but all across the nation this is occurring, everywhere. And so every state seems to be going through something similar. There are groups of lawyers that will support you if you were to pass this tonight or anytime in the future, parental notification and consent. So if you were to pass this, there are so many law firms that would be glad to take this on. I'd like to also say that this is not only for the families. The families can sue, but also the teachers, if they're forced to do something that they they don't feel or they feel remorseful for, they can also sue as well. And there are cases for that. But the institutions that I'm talking about, Pacific Justice Institute, I was on today, and they'd be glad to take this case on. They'd love to. The Institute for Justice, Faith and Freedom locally, the National Center for Law and Policy, the Thomas More Law Center, and the Center for American Liberty, and that's the one where Chloe came. She is, they're covering her. Just a little bit about that. In the case of a mother and daughter, here recently, the Center for American Liberty was proud to announce a settlement of Conan versus Speckett's Union School District, resulting in a $100,000 payment to the school to Jessica. And the reason was that she was basically felt she was maimed by the school. So because of the medical procedures that her mother didn't know about. So having said all that, again, please, consider this. If you need legal representation, it's there. And I think that's basically all I've got to say. So thank you for your time, and please make this happen. Otherwise, people are looking for lawsuits. I mean, they'll sue. Thank you.
Thank you. And following Jose, will be Anita Head. Welcome.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, board members, presenters. Thank you for the opportunity. Since the last board meeting, I have been trying to understand why anyone would be against the proposed October 12 policy revision. And I can't think of any reasonable objection to its passage. Why would any parent not want to know and get consent to medical treatment for their children? So I was looking forward to a vote on this revision tonight. But then yesterday, it seems like at the last minute, I found out that on today's agenda, someone has decided to modify what was discussed at the last meeting, all this highlighted stuff. The proposed revision presented at your last meeting was clear, concise, and makes good sense. The alternative text on today's agenda seems to focus on what is and what is not an excused absence. And it's really irrelevant to what was discussed at the last meeting in the spirit of the revision. It was obvious from the comments at the last meeting that the original revision is what the community wants. The comments today should back that up as well. Whose idea was it to change it and why? That's not a rhetorical question. I really would like to know, because it seems kind of sneaky. The original revision focuses primarily on the October 12 revision focuses primarily on parents' rights to parent. Why are you muddying up the waters with these new alternative changes? Please explain why you are against the original revision. Like I said before, I can't think of a reasonable objection to what was proposed at the last meeting. So I am truly curious as to what your objections are. Last meeting, we heard from Lupita and Maida, who are former clinic employees, that students are coming in for serious medical procedures during school hours. It is happening. Even if it's happening in other nearby school districts, it's still happening. Mr. Andrews told us at the last meeting that there is no history of a student requesting to leave campus for a confidential medical procedure. So then, what is the disagreement with an additional future safeguard? And I ask again, what objection is there to the original revision? As I said before, this revised policy will not only protect our children, but will further protect the district from future lawsuits. John Manley, the trial attorney who has won sexual abuse settlements worth hundreds of millions against school districts, has great advice for school districts. And I quote, "You need a policy where children aren't told to keep secrets from their parents." He goes on to say the common thread between Catholic Church and public school scandals is secrecy. I'm asking you, the board tonight, to listen to John Manley and to listen to us. Thank you.
Good evening, President.
Just one comment I have to make before I let you go. Following Anita Hector's comments will be Anthony Pennell. Thank you.
Good evening, President Diffley, Superintendent Dr. Andrus, and wonderful volunteer school board members. I moved here, my husband and I retired in Marietta 12 years ago because of the wonderful golf course playground that's available, and for affordable housing, and for the family unit that we saw that was greatly supported. I am very involved in the community through sports, also through emergency preparedness in my community, also a neighborhood watch and sunshine group, and in my church I'm involved with supporting the family unit from conception to natural death. Last year, SafeWise did research, and Marietta is the 6th safest family city in California, and it ranked 17th in the nation. The family unit needs to be supported. At the last meeting on October 12th, it was a wonderful program, statement, and I also collected signatures when I became aware of this that I've already turned in. And the people that I talked to, the Marietta families, have spoken. They want adopted the previous language for Board Policy 5113. The board believes that parents, guardians should be involved in decisions surrounding the medical treatment of their children who are under the age of 18. Therefore, while the Education Code allows school authorities to excuse students grades 7 to 12 inclusive for the purpose of obtaining confidential medical services without the consent of the student's parent or guardian, it is the policy of the district that school authorities will not do so. In collecting signatures, I was in conversation with a grandma, and her grandchild does not live in Marietta, but lives in Temecula. This exact same thing happened in her family 3 years ago. The doctor made a mistake and sent the bill to the home address. That's how her parents found out. This is close to us. We need to inform parents, and a strong family unit causes the city to continue to thrive. And thriving families will vote to support the school bond issue as well. Thank you.
Anthony Hennell. Anthony. And following him would be Teresa Wells. Teresa Wells, are you here? Okay. I don't see Anthony, so he spoke earlier. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Superintendent Andrus, President Diffley, and all board trustees. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for this opportunity to speak. Well, tonight, it's been mostly good, except for the comments I'm hearing now. I'm very sad to hear, because it's getting close to Halloween, and I predict tonight the school board is going to give the students and community another wholly undeserved trick. This is definitely not going to be a treat. This afternoon, I spent I sent all members of the board, including Superintendent Andrus, a copy of a 19-page legal document entitled Confidential Medical Releases, published in 2015. It covers California law. I am a paralegal, and it's a very easy to understand document. I wish it could be made public to the group here. You'd understand what confidential medical releases are all about. From what I understand, tonight you will vote to ignore established California law in respect to student confidential medical releases. This is not the place to change the law. The school board's job is to uphold the law. If you want to change the law, you go to your state legislators, your state assemblymen, etc. This is not the place to change the law, is what I'm trying to emphasize. It doesn't seem to matter to the school board that in the history of Marietta Unified, we've had either 0 or next to 0 instances of students requesting a confidential medical release. This board seems to be hell-bent on bankrolling a case at the Supreme Court on parental rights, and apparently you don't care how many laws you violate. The 3 extremists on our board are razor-focused on halting confidential medical releases as a way of stopping teens from obtaining abortion or contraceptives. However, confidential medical releases are also cover teens who have been raped, assaulted, need mental health services for depression or schizophrenia, which begin around age 15, or even to keep a pregnancy secret. There are lots of private medical issues that could cause a student to seek a confidential medical release. And again, this board is doing this for show because there's no record of this being an issue in this district. Do you realize that few women report rape or incest? My own sister was nearly raped. At 18, she jumped out of a glass window on the second story floor to get away from the guy. I only heard about it 40 years later after I told her I was tagged by a wannabe rapist at UC Riverside in the parking lot. This is why confidential medical releases are needed for situations like this. This board is playing God, assuming you know the reason for the confidential release. The team may say one thing and it is completely different because they are embarrassed. Hello, board members. Quite frankly, you don't know the real reason the student needs a confidential release. Furthermore, you assume all students are residing in 1950s style Leave It to Beaver homes. The reality is that not all students live in loving homes. This law in California was made for those students who don't live in those homes. Thank you.
And the last card that we have is John.
That's me.
Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Regarding agenda item number 3, Ms. Vandergrift, as one of your constituents, I ask that you do not approve this latest language presented here tonight for your consideration. While I sincerely applaud the board's recognition of the need to restore and uphold the constitutionally protected right of parents to be the sole arbiter of their minor children's affairs, I feel the revised policy language presented last week goes further to protect those rights and is more direct than the proposed language presented tonight. Regarding agenda item H2, AR 6161, the proposed changes to the selection process for the Curriculum Selection Committee, as I read the language, seems to lean on creating narrow boundaries on community input rather than increasing the community's contributions. I assume we will see more language proposed as the process evolves, so for now, I would just like to make a few points. A target ratio of community members and teachers should be defined. A 70-30 mix with the teachers in the majority, I think, would be reasonable. Each trustee should make 2 or 3 appointments to the committee from a pool of their own constituents. Regarding subparagraph 1A, item 2, community members will be invited to participate via the district website. In what manner will they participate? I don't see that explained anywhere. Subparagraph 1A, item 3, community members will be able to review material after a selection is made. I ask that all material being offered for consideration be available well before there is a selection made. Paragraph 1B, I ask that every reasonable effort to broaden the time instructional material is available for review be made. Subparagraph 1C, item 6, who decides when a topic is controversial? Who decides what the opposing positions may be? And ditto for item 10. Who decides what is balanced? This is especially important in today's climate of social justice and the oppressor versus oppressed lens that activists use to view virtually any controversial subject matter. I have additional questions that I will submit in email form for clarification. And finally, I would like to add that during the last curriculum review, whether justified or not, community members felt blocked out of the process and formed their own review committee. That committee was very well-rounded and included teachers with over 110 years of combined service and many graduate degrees amongst us. We did a great job in block selection of a clearly inferior textbook. That fact alone justifies direct community involvement in future selection committees and will only ensure a smooth, amicable process in future updates of district instructional materials. That's all I have. Excuse me, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Moving on to H, action information items. This H1 is approval of the personnel report. Calls for a motion and a second.
So moved. Okay.
Moved and seconded. Any comments? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries 5-0. Moving on to H2, the first reading of proposed revisions to board policy and administrative regulations. BP/AR 5142 safety, AR 6161.1 selection and evaluation of instructional materials. Do board members have any comments or questions? Julie?
Yeah.
Okay,
So let's see, a couple here, for AR 5142, entitled safety. I know that the current policy, item number 4, the adult is taking the student to emergency medical care at the request of the principal or designee. And then well, anyway, about that particular item, if there's an emergency, why would an adult be taking a student? Why would an ambulance not be called?
Because in those situations, everyone would contact the parent and they would have said, I can't get there, but can you have someone take them?
Oh.
And so it'd be like a staff member who would be designated
Okay.
to do that. So that would be one, it would just be, it wouldn't be personal, random adults. And in most cases, actually, in every incident I've seen so far this year, either the parent has arrived and transported them, or the parents and will meet them at the hospital and go on the ambulance.
So could we add something to this that just says, at the direction of, either by ambulance or at the direction of the parent or the authorized family member?
For number 4?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll take a look at that, see if we can add some more clarifying language around a description of the adult. Is that specifically?
I'm sorry.
The word adult, the description of the adult.
Well, I mean, because what you're saying is it would only not be an ambulance if the parent authorized someone else at the school.
Right.
So can we add in there that pursuant to parental authorization?
Yes, because that would be pretty easy to do. Oftentimes, because we have such kind of a tight community anyways, the parents oftentimes have a family member or a colleague or a neighbor who they know who works at that school site, and they become available to transfer.
So we need to be on there's a.
Oftentimes they're on the emergency card.
Yeah, so I just think that needs to be clarified.
Like a release to, those are others.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then also on, I-142, the proposed revision to the board policy, the student identification cards and safety information. Since this is the first reading, I'm hoping that, so the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline telephone number on the card, that's
been added.
That's been added. Okay, but what I'm wondering is, can we get more information? What is this crisis text line, and what is the scope of their advice to students if a student should call? Who are they? What?
Can you refer to which?
It's okay. So it's at the very bottom of the page, number 1, on board policy 5142A. On the proposed revision, first reading.
Yes, we can add clarifying language. Those are like
It
national.
looks like you're not looking on the same page I am.
I'm sorry, I'm on letter A.
Mine just looks different at the bottom. I don't know what it's.
I know, and
I'm on the BP.
Oh, let's see.
Okay.
We call that. Thank you for your patience.
Going to page 3.
Oh, where's, is the section, okay. No, hold on just a moment. Yes, you like to have that delineated, which ones those are?
Yeah, what is the crisis text line? I mean, is there?
Oh, like number itself.
Company, or what is it? I mean, just more information about,
Okay.
if that's on the student IDs, what, who are they contacting, and what is the scope of their, advice, or whatever their, is it another suicide prevention line, or is there medical advice, or?
Mr. Dillard, do you want to provide some clarification on that? You might know that answer that specific question.
Well, I think that helped because when you look it up, it talks about providing how to identify abuse. It's basically against dating violence, which has been recognized as an issue in schools. So it talks about the hotline, how to get help when you're in a domestic violence situation. I mean, it could be home violence as well, but anyway, understanding relationship abuse, just different ways of making themselves safe, students.
Were you specifically looking to list those numbers in the policy?
No.
You're just looking for clarification?
Yeah, I just, who is behind this? Every student is having an ID card with, someone to call for advice, and who is that? Who are they? What is the scope of advice? What are their values? That sort of thing.
Yeah.
I don't need to know today. This is the first reading.
Yes, that would be view, but there have been I'm not going to be able to say the time span, but in the recent years, they have, through state law, they have dictated that these things are placed on the identification cards and student IDs. So in terms of the background, that would take some research.
So I do see, it says for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline telephone number, and at the district's discretion, the crisis text line, or a local suicide prevention hotline telephone number. So one of these is at the district's discretion, right?
Yeah, the National Suicide Prevention one is not.
Not, right, okay.
And so.
So the one we have discretion over, I guess, I would just like to know what that is.
Sure.
It doesn't have to be today.
No, we'll definitely get that information to you.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have for that.
Thanks. Any other comments? Oh,
yes, actually, last Wednesday, I attended a curriculum development workshop. Is that what you call it?
With the superintendent's advisory.
Superintendent's advisory committee and council, and it was very in-depth. And Mr. Leonard, I really appreciate your comments, and I think you would have been very pleased to see how in-depth it is. And one of the things that I've asked for years is community and parent involvement before the final selection. Community and parent involvement from the very beginning, when there's a whole list of here's all the curriculums, here's all the books we can look at, and have parental and community involvement in that. And just FYI, we can respond to public comment when it is in a special meeting like this, because public comment was on an agendized item. So that's why I'm responding directly to Mr. Leonard. So I really appreciate your response in the 70-30, I think. So you said teacher to community involvement.
And I sent out an email months back too with all of these same suggestions that I sent to each of you, but I'm sure we'll probably have at least another read of this.
Okay. So it was very reassuring to see the whole process from the very beginning to the final selection, with the addition, and I think Mrs. Mention would agree, of just much more parental and community involvement.
Yeah, so I agree. I mean, it was, your presentation was really great. And I know that, of course, we're looking forward to more people being there. But I know you invited more, but so I know we're working on that. So, yeah, thank you.
Any other comments on H2? Hearing none. Moving on to H3. Second reading and adoption of proposed revisions to board policy and administrative regulation, BP/AR 5113. Absences and excuses. Call for a motion.
I'd like to make a motion, Mr. President.
It has been moved by,
What's been,
Yeah, I would like to make a motion on that one.
okay,
Okay, so looking at the wording that is on the second reading for the proposed revisions. So I'm not exactly sure what was intended with the highlighting and whatnot, but I just wanted to go through each paragraph with the wording that I would like to include in my motion. So from, if you're looking at the paper from sentence number 1, I would like to include the language, students shall not be absent from school without their parents' or guardians' knowledge or consent. And then not use the rest of that sentence, as we're calling it. And then sentence number 2, include that whole thing. The board believes that parents, guardians should be involved in all decisions surrounding the medical treatment of their children who are under the age of 18. And then sentence 3, include all of that plus a phrase at the end, which I will read. Therefore, while the education code allows school authorities to excuse students grades 7 to 12 inclusive for the purpose of obtaining confidential medical services without the consent of the student's parent or guardian, it is the policy of the district that school authorities will not do so, and then add except those age 18 or older. And then strike the entire alternate text. And then also, as part of that motion for the administrative regulation, under parental notifications, number 2, where the red language has been struck out. So AR 5113D. Okay, so that part there, so the reason I'm sure that was struck out is because if we're changing the policy, then the notification, that I'm sure that's why that was suggested to be crossed out. But in my motion, I would like to retain that in an altered form. So still notify the parents, but have it read as I'm going to read now. Notify students in grades 7 through 12, and the parents and guardians of all students enrolled in the district that school authorities will not excuse any student from school to obtain confidential medical services without the consent of the student's parent or guardian, and then cite the education code that allows us to do that. So that would be my change. Take out the word may and put the words will not. Is that?
okay,
so just to be, well, there hasn't been a second.
go ahead.
Just to be clear, so you include, so the difference between last board meeting's first reading, sentence number 1 was actually not included.
Right, so
But in the discussion with the trustees, there might have been some value in it, so that's why you see it presented highlighted in yellow, which you're saying to include sentence 1
well,
as presented through the word consent.
I mean, consent is also in sentence number 3.
Good. Sorry, just let me finish my thought. Sorry, Mr. Purdue. So we include sentence 1, sentence 2, and sentence 3.
Well, not all of sentence number 1. The part about, we're starting with administrative regulation 5142, from there to the end of that sentence, as we're saying.
That was inserted simply as a reference. That's all. Because that, That administrative regulation, 5142, which is actually the first reading tonight, which you actually referenced before, talks about only parents can
I'm sorry, so you're saying it wasn't in the first reading?
It was not.
Okay, so,
So we want to include that.
well, not necessarily. I mean, I wasn't involved, I wasn't consulted about these highlighted things, so I don't know who did that. Of course, it would be good if whoever did would, own it.
So based on the conversations and the dialogue that occurred, because there was various suggestions made, we did our best attempt to try to include all those potential options.
So who is,
Myself, along with Mr. Diffley and Ms. Diaz and I did our very best attempt to try and facilitate the conversation based on what we had heard last week. And we inserted the words sentence 1, sentence 2, and sentence 3, and broke them apart into 3 different phrases, just for ease of discussion. That's
okay, well, so are you saying that even though this is what's on the current agenda, we can actually go right back to the first reading and, I don't know what you're saying is possible here, because I don't know who had a discussion, because no one had a discussion with me. I don't know.
it was based on the comments here. So, and yeah, you're not.
I mean, the original wording that we all were talking about is what we want, but if.
So I recognize that the original wording was simply sentence number 2 and sentence number 3. Mr. Diffley had suggested the word all, that's why you see the word all.
Yeah, I like that.
As an option, okay? And so sentence 2 and sentence 3 are what was presented last time. Also, what was struck out last time was sentence 1. And in review by staff, we recognized that the administrative regulation 5142 made a reference to only parents only parents can take kids out of school. We thought that was a valuable reference to inform the policy. So that's just there for reference. And then the alternate text was submitted by one of your colleagues. And so the motion that I understand, as you made right now, and because no one else has seconded this, you could actually amend your motion, is you would include sentence 1 up through the word consent, and then add sentence 2 and sentence 3, and then over in the administrative regulation on page letter D, item number 2 would be unstrike that, but change the word from may to will not.
Right, and then actually in sentence number 3, since someone, my colleague apparently thought it was important to point out, except for those age 18 or older, if that's, that would be understood as far as I'm concerned, because if they're 18 or older, then, they're not, they're adults. I don't think it's necessary to put that, but we may. It also says that, in sentence number 2, it says children who are under the age of 18, so you don't actually need to add that again.
Correct.
Could there be some clarification? I think Julie was asking about that strike in the second page.
The administrator,
Yeah, the AR, was that struck because of the new policy?
Since we were not referencing that, it was just the thinking is that it would be removed. It doesn't have to be removed, it was just, the thought was that we would remove it because we're not going to follow it.
So if we reworded it to what she was saying, there wouldn't be much of an issue there either, it's just about.
And then we would be notifying the parent and the students what the policy is. Every year we would be notifying.
And in doing some additional reading, there's a question about what goes in a notification. We may be constrained by law what's put in the notification, but it does appear there may be flexibility in how the actual application over here. So the annual notification, we still has to go forward.
Well, I think it's the annual notification right here. The legislator, hold on a minute here. When you say constrained by law, there is a letter from the, hold on.
Take it down, it's okay.
So, California Assemblyman Eric C. Strand, author of AB 1541,
which authorized Ed Code Section 46010.1. Wrote a letter to California school superintendents on February 25th, 1987. In his attempt to clarify the intent of his bill, he provided the following letter. So this was sent to all, have you seen this? This was sent to all superintendents.
1981?
87. So
I
this
graduated high
was,
school.
well, this is when the law was made that
Sure.
governed
I love
this. Yeah, okay. So, dear superintendent, there appears to be a misunderstanding on the part of many parents because of the wording in the notification being sent out as a result of my bill, AB 1541, Chapter 194, Statutes of 1986. I have been receiving telephone calls from both school officials and parents throughout the state. Therefore, I would like to clarify my intent in sponsoring AB 1541. As you may already know, AB 1541 requires school districts to notify the parents, guardians of all students in grades 7 to 12 that these pupils may be excused from school for confidential medical purposes without express parental consent. AB 1541 did not change the laws regarding the release of children from school. These laws have remained unchanged for several years, and the policy of any particular school district is determined by the local governing board and not by state law. Parents have the right to know what the school policy is, and AB 1541 merely, and this is in all caps, merely advises parents of what is already permissible in the current law and what is being practiced in some schools in California. As a concerned parent with children in public schools, I felt parents were not aware that school districts may exercise their prerogative according to the decision of the local school board. In accordance with a number of telephone calls to my office, my assumption was correct. I hope you will clear up this confusion by assuring parents in your district that your Board of Education has determined not to dismiss children for confidential medical purposes without the full knowledge and consent of the parent or guardian. Please be careful in your wording of the notification to parents and guardians that you do not confuse the intent of AB 1541 and lead them to believe that AB 1541 mandates school districts to maintain this practice of dismissal without parent or guardian's consent. Thank you for your careful consideration of my request. Sincerely, Eric Seastrand, Assemblyman 29th District. And so that is referring to, Ed Code 46010. And that was a letter given to all superintendents to show the clear legislative intent. Okay.
Thank you for sharing.
I have comments too, and it's the appropriate time.
Okay, you're
Can I do it now?
Wait a second.
Are you not?
Are you proposing that as a,
She's made a proposal, it's a motion.
I second. I second Ms. Van.
So now there's a first and a second.
Yeah, can we comment?
Any comment?
I have comments.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, I printed out the documents that Mrs. Wells sent us, and it explains state law and Ed Code. And I believe that both of those versions on our agenda are run afoul of state law and Ed Code. Okay, so it's a Q&A, which is very clear, and it would be nice if we could put it out there for the rest of the public. But what is confidential medical release? Education Code Section 48205 requires school officials to excuse students from school to attend confidential medical appointments. The school cannot require that the student have parent or guardian consent in order to attend the appointment and cannot notify parents or guardians. Confidential appointments are appointments to receive services that minors can obtain on their own consent under state or federal law. Citations, Ed Code 48205, California Attorney General 168,172 from 2004. Next one, what is the school and district's obligation to notify parents and students about the option of confidential medical release? Education Code Section 46010.1 requires students to notify pupils in grades 7 through 12 inclusive and the parents or guardians of all pupils enrolled in the district that school authorities may excuse any pupil from the school for the purpose of obtaining confidential medical services without the consent of the pupil's parent or guardian. Many schools provide this notice as part of their fall annual school notice packet and in their parent and student handbooks. Education Code 46010.2 10.1. Okay. Next one. If state law requires a school to release students, why does Education Code 46010.1 state that the school, in quotes, may excuse students for the purpose of obtaining confidential medical services? Education Code Section 48205 requires school officials to excuse students from school for confidential medical appointments without parent consent or notice, according to the California Attorney General. That is the controlling law and the reason schools must release students confidentially. Education Code Section 46010.1 requires school districts to notify pupils in grades 7 through 12 inclusive and the parents or guardians of all pupils enrolled in the district that the school authorities may excuse any pupil from the school for the purpose of obtaining confidential medical services without the consent of the pupil's parent or guardian. According to the California Attorney General, Education Code Section 46010.1 is a notification requirement only, setting out language that schools must provide to parents and students at the beginning of the year. The word may is used rather than must because not all students will avail themselves of this option. To the extent there is discretion in the law, it is the student's discretion to choose whether or not to obtain confidential care. It is not the discretion of the school to decide whether or not to make that option available. So California Attorney General 168,172 from 2004, Education Code 46010.1, and then 48205. And this is long. And then I have another letter from the Attorney General, 2004, which is earlier, but many years later than hers. And this was when Bill Lockyer was Attorney General. May a school district require that a student obtain written parental consent prior to releasing the student from the school to receive confidential medical services? And then second question, may a school district adopt a policy pursuant to which the district will notify a parent when a student leaves school to receive confidential medical services? Conclusions. A school district may not require that a student obtain written parental consent prior to releasing the student from school to receive confidential medical services. And a school district may not adopt a policy pursuant to which the district will notify a parent when a student leaves school to obtain confidential medical services. So as Teresa mentioned, we cannot change state law at a Murrieta school board. People need to lobby with Sacramento. But we're going to get mired in lawsuits, which will drain the district financially if the board passes illegal policies.
Well, you don't have to be a paralegal to know that both of those things that you read are guidance and not law. The statute says may, and there's no case law on this, and there are 2 school districts that I know of who have the same language in place right now and have had it in place for years without any.
Getting jam this through no matter what I say, but it does need to be
Or
said.
redirect to the policy and don't.
Okay, I would like to comment without being argued with.
Okay.
Thank you. So I submitted the alternative, and I actually worded this in the last meeting. And my intent behind that was to, and thank you, Mr. Leonard, for getting it, was to make it clearer and not, and just be more cut and dry. And the alternative text, and I submitted it because I believed that was what would happen at the time. However, a couple of meetings ago, I also said that good board policy stands up to public scrutiny. And in the intervening 2 weeks, I've gotten a lot of feedback on this, including the 2 documents that were sent to us, and Mrs. Young read some of that off, that have made me conclude that in fact, the alternative text that I submitted actually is not legal. And so I submitted it as options that we can all consider, but I would like to retract it because I don't think it's legal. at this point under the two documents that we received this afternoon. All of us received the documents, so I know I'm a visual learner, so sitting here and listening, I'm not getting a lot. I have to sit down with it. All of us received those documents. If you want to get them, just shoot one of us an email and we can hit you those links so you can see them yourselves. That really helps me get my thinking clear. So as far as the fourth highlighted alternative text, but I don't think we need a motion or anything like that. I would just retract it, rescind it, because I don't think it's legal. And that's what listening is about, listening to the community and listening to input that we get.
I have some other, since we're sharing legal guidance here, I have some contradicting legal guidance. So I'll throw it out there. Oh, sorry.
And I think you're bringing up a very good word, conflicting, because we're listening to many people who are coming in and citing all kinds of different laws and constitutional amendments. And I'm very concerned that there isn't clear case law on this. And I'm also very concerned because not one of us sitting up here we're not lawyers, to my understanding. None of us are paralegals, and yet we're trying to understand all this. And I'm very concerned that our lawyers have not gone over some of this with us. Have they been involved in this process?
Not to a complete extent. They did some preliminary research on it, and their initial comment, which I have not been able to provide the brief to you, it has actually arrived. Their initial comment was that the notification as written is obligatory in statute. So I don't know to what extent actually will they use that modification from May to will not. But the other part about the board policy about what actually happened, like we're required to do the notice, but the language even our attorney used seemed a little contradictory. So to me it's still unclear if it is or is not permissible to use the word as it's proposed here.
And Mrs. Vandergrift, with all the suggestions you had, I got completely lost. And I would really appreciate having all of the suggestions written out. And could we avoid the striking out and the highlighting and stuff like that? Because that gets confusing for me too. Maybe just Mrs. Vandergrift's suggestions. Is that fair?
I don't see any, I mean, there it is all written down, and I pointed out that, I mean, I think it's very clear, actually. I mean, did you want to show her, Dr. Andrews, what?
No, it's fine.
I have a quick question that's probably a little bit what was the process of this? I was unaware, actually, as we had first reading and now second reading. It's only been recent that in our meeting, I had asked for clarification on why there was a change. And I didn't get much of an answer. And then the second one was, I wasn't aware that this has been waiting so long to get to the public and to us.
Yeah. Okay, those are good questions. Let me do the response. So just to clarify, Mr. Pardue, so when we, in a previous meeting, we looked over this draft as was presented, and you were asking for why was there a change?
I don't think, it's not so much the draft, but just I felt the same sense in other previous requests. It does feel like it did take a year for us to get to the point. Okay. It doesn't seem like this is super complex unless it was just, we've kind of obscured until the second reading that there was a concern about state law and what have you. But first reading, I didn't hear any of this. Second reading, all of a sudden, I hear a lot more.
Oh, okay. So as you understand by our board bylaws, there's a process by which a committee member or board member can request an item on agenda. And so I always watch for what those things are, and then I consult with the board president to figure out when they come on the board agenda. And so though I had multiple conversations with Mrs. Vandergrift about this, and you have to correct me, I have to find the email. I never saw a formal request to have this on the agenda. We talked about it. Excuse me, I could go back and look at my, I don't recall one. We had conversations about the need to do it, but actually have an agendized item, nor this draft language was not presented to me until Mr. Diffley emailed it to us and asked to have it agendas. And at that point in time, we executed that request.
The yellow sticky note meeting that we had, but anyway, hopefully we will,
Oh, I recall now.
Yeah.
Okay, so in that one,
so
there
what
was,
month was that, like March or
it
something?
was March. We had had a conversation about that. And at that point in time, I had provided all the trustees with a response to that. And that was a request, but also at that time it wasn't brought forward. There was not it would have been helpful then so this is more a communication issue, not a I don't want to. It's more about, it would have been helpful to say, can we really put that on the agenda, let's have a conversation with the president, see if we can get that agendized. Because my assumption was, because I didn't get that follow-up, that the answers provided at the time, like this has been statute, this is law, was satisfactory. Clearly it was not. That's why we're here today. But at the moment, I didn't get that, for lack of a better word, a rebuttal or a second request or a clarifying request.
There was some interim, but anyway, I'm not going to quibble about that.
I hate to step on to, there was a second part of that, which we just recently had a meeting in which I had asked you, because Dr. Anderson, I do see you as an expert in what we're doing here. And in our conversation, I know Mr. Diffley was there, we're agendizing this meeting. And I'd asked for clarification because I was a little confused as to the necessity for this alternate text and how there is a difference. And so when I requested that, your response confused me, and I was unsure of exactly what was getting at. And tonight, there's just a whole flood of lots of other things going on. And I'm kind of curious at your response. Were you not aware of the difference between the two? Or I guess I need some explanation.
Sorry. Yeah, not trying to hide it. As a matter of fact, what we're trying to do is provide all the available potential options available to the board. To be very clear, and for anyone who has a scorecard or following along home or in the audience, the October 12th reading, the proposed policy had all of sentence 1 struck out. And then what was presented was sentence number 2 and sentence number 3 with the additional word all. Okay? And that's what was presented at that point in time. During the course of the first reading, there was dialogue about how do we get to more clarity. And so in listening to all of those things, and even Ms. Lund said, look, I made an attempt, and she's now redacted or pulled back that alternate text. So what's available still could be a different motion, which would be sentence 2 and sentence 3, which was the original one. What we did is add the sentence numbers to provide options for the board to make different considerations. And as you in your motion, Ms. Vandergriff, you actually acknowledged that sentence 1 may be of value. And so in your motion, that does include that, and you seconded that. So that was, we're just trying to provide a way for the trustees to get to the language they want.
I think it came to the alternate text, and as I read that, I realized, as the audience has made pretty clear, that it would be a student in the alternate text would simply just be marked excused.
Correct.
And it says, who are absent shall not be marked excused without the consent of their parents and guardian.
Right, so then they would be marked unexcused.
And I think what also the point being made is that Ms. Lund has withdrawn that. She'd like to withdraw.
I understand. Yeah, it's kind of a significant difference where it is.
I understand.
Okay, we're going to notify by marking unexcused. It seems a little bit.
And I think to the last part of the question you might have is process. How do we get to this part here today? So, if we may just finish this slide and you can jump in, is that between the last board meeting and tonight, I've had various conversations with staff members, with trustees who've had interest in this language, who've reached out and said, can we try this, can we discuss this? So that's why you have what's presented here as alternative, including the word all inserted in the sentence 2. And so the trustees, you have the option, there's a motion on the table now which requires a vote. If it were to fail, you could actually postpone, we could try this again, or we could proceed with something that's here.
I think my last point I just want to make my comment on the whole thing. parents are our partners, and I do think that the reading that we have and the discussion in the first reading that I recall us having was that this was just too wordy. There was no discussion about it violating state law. In fact, the discussion I heard quite clearly was that there was a carve-out that allows for us to notify parents, and it's, now suddenly there isn't. And I'm sure it's because in the time, people researched and looked and what have you. I will just put my 2 cents forward that I think parents always should, and just like, hey, when we're talking about government is we the people. And the school boards, I think the comment was school boards can't just violate state law. Well, if we lived in a perfect world, states would not violate the Constitution. And the Constitution's been violated over and again. And so as a school board, and I've said this numerous times to so many people, the Marine Corps, Semper Fi, they're always faithful to the Constitution of the United States. Soldiers know that. Anyone who takes the oath knows that. We're taking an oath to the Constitution. And that's the important element here. And parents have constitutional rights. I will stand by it till the day I die.
Mr. Gifford, I think someone was going to make a comment.
Just want to comment, sailors also uphold it. Well, it's all right, here in the Marine Corps. Yeah, I'm sorry.
If we have an attorney in the room, can she come up and comment on this?
Well, actually, I just wanted to point out here, because we have legal, I have right in front of me Ramona Unified School District's policy that was adopted in 2015. And so Dr. Andrews, you were talking about the notification and potential legal issues with it. So I just want to read this right from their language. At the beginning of each academic year, notifications shall be provided to the parents/guardians of all students K through 12, informing them that school authorities will not excuse any student from school for any reason except in cases of medical emergency without the consent of the student's parent or guardian. So this is the notification of their policy. And so then it cites Education Code 46010.1. So perfectly legal, enforced right now in Ramona Unified. The notice shall state as follows: the board believes that parents or guardians should be involved in decisions surrounding medical treatment of their children. Therefore, while the Education Code allows school authorities to excuse pupils in grades 7 through 12 for the purpose of obtaining confidential medical services without the consent of the student's parent or guardian, it is the policy of the district that school authorities will not do so. And so there's no, this has been enforced since 2015. It's not been challenged. There's no case law on it. It's in compliance with the statute. It cites Education Code 46010.1. So I don't see it, I saw that guidance, I saw that months ago, that from the email that was sent to all of us today. I saw that guidance months ago. It's guidance. I have guidance here which contradicts that. So anyway.
We have an attorney in the room which would like to make a brief comment. Can we allow that?
Well, you can ask the president if you will.
Paul can, okay. Emily can come talk.
Before you start, do you have a time limit you'd like to?
I think 3 minutes.
Can you use 3 minutes, Michelle?
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. I was just going to read directly from Ed Code, which is applying to your name, I'm sorry. Yeah, Emily Brooks. I'm a California licensed attorney. To be frank, education is not my area of expertise, but I am capable of reading statutes and I can help interpret to the extent that I think will help this meeting tonight. Statute 48208 specifically states, 2085, notwithstanding section 48200, a pupil shall be excused from school when the absence is, and it enumerates a variety of instances in which an absence shall be excused. In legal speak, the word shall is mandatory on whatever government body is enforcing the law. So when you are told you shall, it means you must excuse a student from school for the purpose, and this is one of the enumerated areas for the purpose of having medical, dental, optometrical, or chiropractic services rendered. It doesn't limit it to if authorized or notified to the parents, right? So they aren't required to have parental consent in order to excuse that absence. So basically the school board is being told you must excuse a student who is attending a medical appointment. The parental notification, as I would interpret it, I would encourage the board to adopt as detailed in the policy guidance that Mrs. Young read out. Schools are required to notify both students and their parents that students can be excused confidentially for confidential medical care to which they, as anyone over the age of 12 has a right in California to obtain medical care in certain areas confidentially, such as birth control, mental health counseling that they may not want their parents to obtain. And again, if people in the room or in the community are opposed to that, the fact that teenagers can obtain confidential medical care, that's an issue to take up with Sacramento, not with our local school board, and not opening ourselves up to massive lawsuits, liability. The school notification policy also exempts and protects schools from liability for students who obtain that confidential care, even during school time, with a small exception if the school actually provides the transportation or coordinates the care. So simply releasing a student who is then going to drive or obtain a ride independent of school officials to or from that appointment does not open up to school liability.
So this is your legal opinion?
My reading of the law, the term shall, that's pretty clear. That's constitutional interpretation, legal interpretation 101.
And what if there is another statute that addresses directly parental consent and school district's prerogative to make a policy?
Are you referring to the Ramona policy? Because that's only only in Ramona.
I'm referring to, well, Ramona is a school district and Ramona exercise their prerogative to adopt this policy.
Certainly wouldn't be binding on Marietta.
Well, of course not.
Right.
It shows the prerogative is available.
Well, you can make any rule you want, but it's going to be challenged in a court of law.
Has it been challenged since 2015? Is there any case law?
I believe it's.
No, there's not. I talked to an attorney last night. There's no case law there. It's not been challenged since 2015.
Because it's not relevant. And in fact, these parental rights issues are in direct conflict with a student's individual rights. There's no mention of parental rights in the 14th Amendment.
Aren't you an immigration attorney?
Quiet please, quiet please.
Mr. Tivley, could I call for the vote? Is that out of order?
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Am I out of order asking us to call for the vote?
I think we should. I think the only thing I will add, I think we all could bring in our legal attorneys. We could go all the way to the Supreme Court and have different opinions, right? And I agree with Linda, and we can call for it.
If you don't mind, would you restate the motion?
Wait,
Julie.
okay, so. Okay, so the motion is to approve the revisions for board policy 5113. And so you just want me to read, okay. Students shall not be absent from school without their parents' or guardians' knowledge or consent. The board believes that parents and guardians should be involved in all decisions surrounding the medical treatment of their children who are under the age of 18. Therefore, while the Education Code allows school authorities to excuse students grades 7 to 12 inclusive for the purpose of obtaining confidential medical services without the consent of the student's parent or guardian, it is the policy of the district that school authorities will not do so. And then the corollary to that is in the administrative regulation, the notification, parental notifications, item number 2. Notify students in grades 7 through 12 and the parents and guardians of all students enrolled in the district that school authorities will not excuse any student from school to obtain confidential medical services without the consent of the student's parent or guardian. Education Code 46010.1.
Is that part of your motion?
That was her motion. That was second.
I think my concern is the Ed code may not be the same when we change the words on that. Might be a different part of the code.
Well, I mean, the in the notification. That's the same wording that the other districts have used.
Well, I mean, in the ed code, you change the intent, it's conceivable it's in a different part of ed code.
So we do a little research before we actually go to print.
Right.
Okay, it's been moved. And do I have a second?
Yes, second.
I have a second. We've had discussion. Boy, have we had discussion. Okay. I'm going to ask vote by individual. Ms. Lund?
No.
Thank you. Mr. Pardue?
Yes.
Thank you. Mrs. Vandergrift?
Yes.
Thank you. Mrs. Young?
No.
Mr. Disley, yes. Moving on to H4, student discipline, expulsion case number 2023-2024-124. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Disley, I move that the Board of Education of the Marietta Valley Unified School District expel the student for the violation of California Education Code 48900C under Education Code 48915C for the remainder of the 2023-2024 school year.
Do I have a second?
Okay.
Second.
Then move to second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries 5-0. Let's see. Okay. Yeah. Item K, adjournment. I call for a motion and a second to adjourn the Board of Education meeting at 8:01 p.m.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you for coming. Thank you, audience. Thank you, Mr. Dickman. Well run. Yeah.